All right. All right. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the March 15th, 2022 meeting of the City of South Pasadena Mobility and Transportation Infrastructure Commission. Liana, would you please call roll?
Yes. Chair Abelson,
Here.
Vice Chair Fisher,
Present.
thank you. Commissioner Dunlap.
Here.
And Commissioner Hughes.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Liana. And I believe Council Member Primuth will be joining us shortly. And we have Public Works Director Ted Kerber, as well as Public Works Assistant Liana DeWitt on the Zoom. And then just a quick note that we are holding what I hope to be our last meeting exclusively virtually. So if you do have a comment, please be sure to raise your hand and you will be recognized and you can provide your comment at that time. All right, with that, let's proceed. I think the next is the Pledge of Allegiance. What do we have? I think Vice Chair Fisher, would you lead us?
Yes, please stand. Put your right hand over your heart. Face your virtual flag. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vice Chair Fisher. All right, first up on our agenda is public comment, that is comment from the public regarding items not on our agenda. Liana, do we have anybody with a hand raised? I think I see Joanne Knuckles. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. Ms. Knuckles? Welcome. You're on mute.
Okay, here we go. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm attending to comment on our article in the LA Times today about Santa Barbara, and the headline is Santa Barbara fights fast food traffic. So they're looking to file, they're going to be possibly filing a public nuisance complaint against a Chick-fil-A because their drive-through is a public nuisance. When you read the story, it echoes what our neighborhood has been complaining about, and a lot of you have visited, is the drive-through for the pickup and drop-off at Holy Family that clogs up Oak Street and Ramona south of Oak. City manager's been out, Ted's been out, John's been out, Larry's been out, and of course, John Primuth just has to go out his front door to see the issue. So I think a lot of what they're doing kind of echoes what's going on here. The difference is that the city of Santa Barbara had tried to do something about it and has been talking to the Chick-fil-A. And by the way, 40 years ago, Santa Barbara outlawed drive-throughs, but the Chick-fil-A went into a former Jack in the Box and the drive-through was grandfathered in. So the drive-through pickup and drop off at Holy Family is not approved, was never approved, and it's basically illegal. So I'm hoping that the city can start a dialogue to tell them that this is not legal and that they would have to apply to do it. But I think the worst part of the whole thing is, obviously Chick-fil-A doesn't have a big enough parking lot, Santa Barbara, but Holy Family does, and they don't use it. And it's really becoming a problem. Talked to two of the neighbors down the street that are, you know, more impacted than I am, but and it's really unsafe. And I'm hoping that the commission can make a recommendation to the city or whatever, whoever that would be, if it's to Ted and the Public Works Department or to the city manager to start a dialogue and discontinue the use of this drive-through until Holy Family School applies for a permit to do this, and there's a public hearing about it. And of course, we'll all come out and say no, because it's definitely a quality of life issue for us, and it's dangerous for all the kids that walk to school. And I think it really needs to stop, because this has been going on for way over 10, maybe even 20 years. So I'm bringing it to your attention mainly because of this article, and hopefully Ted could send it to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you for joining and sharing that with us. And I was going to ask Ted to maybe briefly touch on efforts recently made in that regard, but I thought probably it's better done under our next topic, which is status of projects. So Ted, maybe you can touch upon that when you give us your report.
Yes, of course.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Ted. Liana, anyone else for general public comments?
No, there's no one else.
Okay, then we'll go ahead and close public comment item number 1, and we'll move right along to status of projects. Public Works Director Gerber, would you take it away?
Thank you, Chair Abelson. So as of our last meeting, we've decided to reorganize how the agenda works. So our thought here is that at the top of our monthly meetings, we'll give a brief update on some of our more visible projects. At this time, we'll save the commission-led discussion ad hoc committee items later on in the agenda for commission-initiated discussion, but our discussion on current projects will be right here at the top of the agenda. So I'll do a brief one because I think we might have a long discussion tonight, and I'll start with the item that Joanna had mentioned. Unfortunately, don't have much of an update since our last commission meeting on this. The last action we took in this area was to engage both the high school about modifying the zone on Fremont there to permit temporary loading to mitigate some of the traffic issues. And so our next step there is to work through this process operationally to paint the curbs and install signage with the high school. We did have a discussion with the Holy Family management and administrative staff, and the mayor joined us for that discussion, which we communicated that the current circulation plan is not working, that as our speaker said today, where the residents along Ramona are experiencing the cars building up in front of their driveways. Usually the cars are running, so there's an issue there with exhaust. And we talked about some possible ideas of mitigation. Holy Family offered up some thoughts. There was a lot of ideas floated. None seem as feasible as utilizing the parking lot on the other side of Fremont. There was some opposition to that idea because of that would require more students to cross the street. But we think operationally there's some ways around that. So again, we haven't done much work on this in the last few weeks, but our next step is to re-engage Holy Family and try to find a solution, that being the city's preference. So if there's no questions on that, I'll just jump into some of our higher level capital projects, and then we can get on with our agenda tonight. We're currently working on our Fair Oaks signal.
Ted, can I ask a quick
Yes, Commissioner
question
Hughes.
about that? With Holy Family kind of, I don't want to say pushing back, but the issue of the students crossing the street, but don't they understand that we actually have, South Pasadena students that cross the street in both directions there, whether they're going to the middle school, crossing from, that, if you will, west to east, or we've got students going west to east that are going towards the high school. I mean, it's not like they're the only students that would be crossing Fremont. We have students both directions, middle school, high school, and perhaps elementary, that even might be going to Marengo or Aurora Vista. So I don't quite understand the rationale about the concern about crossing when we have students that are doing that now. They're just, students that are not Holy Family are doing that.
We did bring up that concern. Their response was that in these other locations, there's, and I haven't been able to fact check this or talk to the department involved, but the staff said that at those other locations, there's city-sponsored crossing guards, whereas they don't have that at their facility, and they would have to add staffing in order to accommodate that. I don't know the validity of that, and we'd have to verify that. It may not be an issue overall. There's a lot of factors involved on, how many students and what the dynamics of that are. But we did bring that up with them, and that was their response.
It would be interesting if we could ask them for counts, meaning that if we know that you've got a middle school age and a high school age, these are the ages of enrollment, and how many will be elementary, then maybe you split the difference and say, okay, those that are dropping off elementary would be going into the main lot, but everyone middle school, high school get dropped at the auxiliary lot across the street. There's got to be a solution there, and we should be able to find out those numbers.
We actually brought that up too, because that was an idea. It was a long conversation with a lot of ideas. And so we, given the age of the students can be important in terms of how their operations work. First off, a lot of their staff aren't able to observe what's going on because they're busy with their student operations inside the facility, directing the whole pickup process. But we did bring up that possibility of dividing up the students. Their issues were, one issue they brought up was that families have multiple age students in the school. And so it's hard to divide them up given, a pickup location here and a pickup location there for the same family. That was one item they brought up. They also, expressed the difficulty in enforcing that for different age students would have different, pickup procedures, and how would they enforce that among the parents. A lot of it came down to them saying that they didn't have the staff resources available to make these types of suggestions work. But that's not to say that we can't make that work. It was just, that was the initial conversation and their response about it.
Yeah. It's just too bad, because I think there's solutions there that would make them a better neighbor, and they're not very difficult, in my opinion.
Yeah, it was helpful to sort of lay everything out on the table. And now we can cycle back and just say, well, we've talked about everything. We got to do something. So this is the best solution. And as we often say here, this isn't in stone. Like, we could try something, and if it doesn't work, we can always try something else.
Is the plan to kind of go back and speak with them before the end of the school year, or like maybe are they planning a summer school schedule at all where we could test? I mean, if they're running like, and I don't know, and maybe my fellow commissioners or Councilmember Primuth might know, if they're running summer school, like in a reduced summer school, that we might be able to encourage them to test some options during the less busy period of a regular academic year, and see how things flow, and give it some opportunity to test some things as an option.
So it's a great idea. We don't have a timetable planned right now, and that's not because we don't see the urgency. It's just that right now it's a limitation on our end about having enough staff to actually handle all of these operational issues and projects. Hope to be resolved very soon. But you'll hear that probably from me a couple of times this night. This month and last month's been especially difficult in terms of just trying to juggle all these different efforts at this time of the year, and in this particular circumstance with where the city is right now. But yeah, that would be our plan, is try to do that as soon as possible.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate those responses very, very much.
Thank you. So moving on to our Fair Oaks signal project. This is the installation of the fiber optic cable and some devices along Fair Oaks and then tying into City Hall. We've run into a couple challenges with this project a few times in trying to get the cable actually run through the existing conduit. We've been successful up until this point, but we continue to have that as an issue that we're trying to resolve. As I had mentioned previously, our Public Works Department moved from City Hall, which was the original site for the traffic management center that was implemented, over to Garfield. So we're trying to resolve the implications of that. We are at the point where we're trying to work with our neighbors on making this project supportive regionally, and talking to Pasadena about tying into whatever infrastructure they have. Unfortunately, early on in the project, the southern tie-in to LA County Metro and Alhambra was deleted from the project. So we're trying to deal with the repercussions of that. We've just recently met with Metro and LA County Public Works in trying to find a path forward in resolving some of the, I guess I'll just say again, implications of that. And the intent of the project was to be able to tie into the Metro system and provide an advantage to some of their traffic signal prioritization and bus signal prioritization initiatives. So we've got a few things in the works. That kind of segues into the second phase of that project, which is the Rogan funded project to make design improvements to Fair Oaks. We're really hoping that is a well-scoped project based on its predecessor, the signal synchronization project, and given the modifications to the fiber optic installation project, we've started the second project in terms of laying the groundwork for what the scope will look like, but we do have some modifications and changes informed by what we're doing presently. So we don't have much of an update on that. And I think it's actually advantageous to give that project a little more time to get started, so we make sure that those scopes line up well. Moving on from there, we also have our Fremont and Huntington project, which, as you recall, was a $6 million funding from the Measure M MAP program and a $10 million funding from the Measure R MIP program. We had a strong desire to alter the schedule and the program, the expenditure program for those projects. The Measure R funding had already started, and we have not started expending money yet. The Measure M had started at the beginning of the year, and we had not started expending money yet. Also, both projects were very much ITS focused, and the intent was to make them very much pedestrian and active transportation focused. So we actually we asked Metro on the Measure M side to modify some of the details of the grant funding, and we submitted that a week or two ago, and we're waiting to hear back. I think I had mentioned to the commission previously that there was some modifications at Metro's board level to redirect how Measure R funding can be spent. There's an opening up now of the possibilities with Measure R funding. So we've reached out to our Measure R Metro contact to see if we can slightly redefine the scope for that $10 million to include more active transportation elements, such as bike lane improvements that would not have previously been covered by that $10 million. So there's a little bit of movement in terms of resetting the grant funding scopes for those so that we can get started in the correct way and have those projects focus on Fremont and Huntington, slowing traffic, improving pedestrian access, and that kind of thing. So there's, again, I know there's a lot of people are anxious to have these projects started, but it is a good thing to get them started off on the right foot and have the grant funding properly associated with what we would like to do on those projects. So speaking of Measure R funding, that brings us to the, Commissioner Hughes, yes.
One quick question. Knowing that we're kind of delaying because we want to get our numbers lined up and in sync and see if there's flexibility there. Do we have any concerns about timing and cost escalation because of the timing? Are we still feeling pretty comfortable? Because I know there's supply chains and escalating costs and energy costs and such. So are you feeling still pretty comfortable with where we think we're going to be cost-wise, and obviously the funding? And if there's going to be more flexibility in the funding, that's good, but I'm more worried that the longer we take, the more expensive it becomes, and then we eat in more of the budget and we get less for our dollars.
It is definitely a concern. There's not a whole lot we can do about it. We aren't shifting the schedule much. It's on the order of like 6 to 8 weeks, really, because we have to actually expend the funds within 3 years after this fiscal year. And we're only 3 months, away from the end of this fiscal year. So we're not really shifting things all that much. The Measure R, we would hope to shift it because it's already started last year. So actually shifting it forward would give us more flexibility in terms of utilizing the money for a longer period of time. And then perhaps when we're in the later construction phases, we get some relief from some of these inflation issues. So it's hard to predict. Certainly starting anything now or within the next couple of months with everything that's going on in the world is going to be impacted by that. But our early expenditures are going to be more of the professional services realm of impact reports, design, and things like that. So hopefully we see some relief when we actually get down the road a couple of years for construction. But it's a good question.
Thank you.
Of course. And for one of our last sort of big CIP transportation project, talking about the Measure R funding, we have not had much movement on our on and off ramp work. Our next step is, as I stated in our last meeting, is to meet with Metro, Caltrans, and Pasadena to discuss I'm saying because I'm saying we're doing it again, but we have to return back to our original agreement about covered expenditures under Measure R and make sure that we are all still on the same page, all those agencies, about how that's going to move forward. So we talked to Metro about that recently. We're constantly engaged with the city of Pasadena, but we have not yet spoken with Caltrans. So as far as, recently. So that's our next step. We're planning on setting up a meeting with them, hopefully before our next commission meeting, to make sure that we're all on the same page with that. And there's been some changes to that project since it was reviewed by Caltrans previously. The previous concept on that project was to utilize some of Pasadena's power facilities land, but we're hoping that that impact can be reduced under a new conceptual design. So there's a lot of things in the works. I know they're moving slowly and you haven't heard much in the last 4 weeks on some of these projects, but we're at a good place with some of them, and the other ones we still have to move forward on.
Thank you, Ted. Would you just briefly update us if there is anything material to update us on with regard to street improvement projects?
Yes. So we are right in the midst of our budget preparation for 22-23. And so this is the time for us to literally within, the next couple of weeks here to solidify what our fund balances are for things like that, like our SB1 funding. We've asked the Management Services Department to help us out in communicating with the state about reducing our maintenance of effort requirements. So that is still underway. As far as our current work on street projects, we have a 60% design complete on the last set of street projects with our contractor. The contractor's contract has expired. The agreement has expired. We need to extend that agreement by going back to council in the next month and continue work on that project. The current state is for our staff to review the impacts to water infrastructure pipelines, given the 60% design. So we can do a little bit of work in the meantime while we get that contract back before council. So we can take that to the next design iteration with our contractor. That work shouldn't be affected by our funding right now. So we can continue with the design work, but we really need to figure out what's going on with our construction funding so that when the design is complete, we can roll right into the street work.
All right, thank you, Ted. Does anyone have any questions for Ted regarding project status before we move on to our next item? Kim?
Ted, just a quick question, Meridian. Any more information or updates on Meridian? I know we've taken, steps there, but anything else that's taken place?
Yes, a few things. So we are right in the midst of utilizing community development block grant funding to make some improvements to intersections along Meridian. You'll actually see an item on the council agenda for, I think it's tomorrow, to pass a resolution to utilize those CDBG funds to make some ADA improvements along Meridian. We actually were informed that we have additional CDBG money that we weren't expecting for that project work. So we'll see how far our dollar can go. And with the staff, given council's direction to take a look at Meridian and the commission's direction to take a look at Meridian, I've asked our staff to take a look at the intersections that were previously brought up to see if we can understand what types of improvements we can make there, given we've already taken a look at we've had some traffic studies conducted, as I understand, on counts there, but I don't know how much work we've done as far as I want to say geographic site conditions, but there's another word I'm looking for here in terms of like the site distance at those intersections. So that's going to be our next step at those Meridian intersections.
Great. Thank you.
Ted, a quick follow-up question. Sorry, John, I'll get right to you. On the CDBG funds, are you proposing to use those funds for sidewalk or ramp improvements at any other locations in the city, or is all of it on Meridian?
So the initial set was along Meridian. This extra amount we are considering utilizing I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the streets, Raymondale and begins with an A. I'm blanking on the name of the street, but it's just north of the State Street area in that highly residential, intersection area. And that's where we've received some concerns about there's a high level of foot traffic in that area. And so we think that might be a good place for ADA ramp improvements, probably about, one large intersection, which is what would be covered under this additional funding.
Great. All right. Thank you. Commissioner Fisher, sorry, Vice Chair Fisher.
Thank you. Ted, one of the issues raised by those who live on Meridian Avenue is the accident history there. We've heard a lot of anecdotal information, but we are hoping to get objective information about the types of collisions that occur there, whether they're intersection collisions or mid-block whether they're ran off road, parked vehicle, whatever they are. We're hoping to get a better understanding of that so that we could then be informed as to what measures might be taken to mitigate those. Have you had a chance to request the Switters data and or the specific collision data available from the police department?
We haven't had a chance, as far as I understand, to obtain that. It's not too much work to do. It is just a matter of reaching out and getting it done. The Switters is fairly straightforward. We have an account and we download it. I think you can download a year at a time, the raw data. Takes some time to process it because you have to basically, parse it through a table and match it up to the codes that tell you what type of accidents and where they are and that kind of thing. So it's not something that takes a long time to get. It just takes some effort from the staff perspective to organize it. Actually, I'll get into this in a moment because that was our hope for this evening, was to have more data for you with these Measure RM projects, but it takes a bit of effort. For the police, it does take some time because they redact all of the information and then provide it to us. So we have a little bit of that information available, but we have to get more on Meridian. And so when we come back to the commission with some recommendations from the technical side in our traffic study evaluations, we'll bring whatever data we have available to you. I know there was a previous idea and effort to essentially crowdsource some of that data from the community. We actually don't advise that because it's puts the city in an awkward position to receive safety data from the community and then own that data and be responsible for the information that it contains versus acquiring it through our appropriate channels, through our police reporting and for the state database. So we will have hopefully something for you. And I agree that the best decisions are made based on technical data. And so that would accompany our recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Anyone else, anything for Ted before we move on? Let's see any hands raised. So why don't we move forward onto our third item on the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes of our last meeting on February 15th. Has everyone had a chance to review the draft enclosed with the packet? Does anybody have any changes? Once again, the draft that was sent out includes input from both myself and Commissioner Hughes, who has her hand raised. Kim.
Just really small on the second page, last sentence, we're missing a period. That's it.
So that's at the very end of the section
Yeah,
7.
San
right?
Gabriel mission, then period.
Yeah. And then I would add that, and maybe it's just a result of accepting changes, that there are, let's see, it's the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th paragraphs of that same section, section 7, are for some reason underlined. I don't think they need to be. It's probably just a clerical error, but so we can remove the underlining, that would be great. Anyone have anything else?
Super minor. It's 626 Golden Streets. It's
Where's
the name
this?
of the event. In the last line of the second page. I think it's 626 Golden Streets.
Right, that same paragraph that Kim referred to. So plural in the quotation there. Okay, anything else? All right, can I have a motion to approve as amended?
I would
Commissioner
so
Hughes?
move that we approve the amended minutes from the February meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, Commissioner Dunlap seconds. Liana, correct me if I'm wrong. Can we vote by raise of hands on this?
And you would need to say aye or yes,
Okay,
because you're on Zoom.
great. All right. All those in favor, would you say aye and raise your hand?
Mhm.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Kim? Is Kim frozen?
I think she's frozen. Oh, there she is.
Kim, are
Aye.
you? Aye. There
Aye.
it is. All right. I
Sorry,
think that,
Mike.
all right. Motion passes 4-0. Excuse me. Thank you all very much. All right. I think that brings us to our major topic of the evening, Measure M projects. I guess we'll start with an introduction and report from Ted, please.
Yes,
And
so
good
I'm
luck.
actually, I'm gonna, thanks. I'm gonna share my screen here just in case we want to reference any of these documents. So first off, let me apologize again for providing this late. When we first met in November, which was also a Measure M related item, I made the commitment to you that we would not produce materials late, so you have enough time to review them. I suppose there's something about Measure M that just brings that out in us, but we've been very constrained with our staff resources. We've got some things in the works in terms of adding staff and adding contractor help that we should have very soon in place. So hope to mitigate this in the future. We also weren't able to do the level of technical evaluation that we would have liked to do. We still have some time, so we may be able to do that this month. But we basically turned this right around from council, expecting on March 2nd with council that this would be adopted and be moving forward. So we didn't have a whole lot of time to prepare to return to the commission. But we do have some time after this meeting. We just want to get this conversation started. So with that said, the Measure M submittal timeline is to actually have this in front of the governing board in June. And so all the cities right now are going through the process that we're going through as far as their public engagement and getting council adoption. We plan to have council adoption in late April or early May at the latest, so that we're ready for June. So we do have a little bit more time on this, and that's why we wanted to bring it to your attention tonight, so we could start the discussion, if not finish the discussion, and send this back to council. So with that said, all of you know the history here. I won't belabor it, but basically, South Pasadena has about $1.7 million in funding allocated to spend on city projects. That funding could be designated as a regional fund, but this has been designated for our use. And this commission has spent the last year, probably 4 to 8 meetings discussing these topics and developing a list and then prioritizing it to send to council. We brought that list to council on March 2nd. There was a long discussion that ensued. Council mostly accepted some of the recommendations and made some changes to some, which I'll explain. And then for 2 projects in particular, wanted additional MTech feedback on. So the 7 projects that were submitted, and I'll jump down here to, this is the March 2nd council report, were number 1, an Orange Grove Avenue widening from Oliver Street to Arroyo Seco Parkway. Number 2, Columbia Street striping and signals. Basically the length of Columbia Street from Orange Grove to Columbia Place near Fair Oaks. A signal at Garfield Avenue and Monterey Road on the eastern border of the city with San Marino. Improvements to Gravalia Street and Fair Oaks Avenue, primarily on the north east corner. And then rectangular rapid flashing beacon devices at several locations in the city. There was 2 other projects here that we designate as reserve projects, which could basically fill in if any of these above projects weren't deemed feasible. So I'm gonna just quickly go over the council comments on these projects, and then we can get into the recommendation for tonight and then have a discussion. So the Orange Grove Ave widening project, not all, but several of the council members didn't look favorably upon this project. There was some public comments received that were against this widening effort. It was a long discussion, so rest assured that the city staff and Mayor Pro Tem Primuth provided the council a lot of input onto why these projects were selected, what's the basis for them, why they're a positive improvement for the community. But this one in particular was not seen favorably, and the council directed for this to return back to MTech. And essentially, the consensus was that this should be removed from the list, if not reconfigured to be different than a widening project, or perhaps move to another type of funding source and considered under a different project list. So we'll be talking about this one this evening. Columbia Street. Let me say that the priority, it was deprioritized from number 2 on the list. It wasn't given an exact number, but it was deprioritized in favor of another project, which I'll get to. There wasn't any very critical objections to this project. This project's actually been around for a little while. It was on a previous Measure M list, but council asked MTech to return this project to the commission, and actually wrote down very specifically what they wanted here. They asked MTech for more information on the all-around benefit of the striping configuration proposed for Columbia, with a focus on the safety and calming features to be included in the work. So that one is still on the list and moving through. There was just some additional information requested about the project. Let me get down to the list here. The Garfield Avenue and Monterey Road traffic signal was met with some concern because of the coordination efforts that it would take with San Marino. So the project inclusion is essentially contingent on San Marino's buy-in to the project. And we've reached out to San Marino, and we've made contact with their contracted traffic engineer. We haven't had the discussion yet, but we'll follow up with that. And I'll get to this a little bit later, but there was also an added component to this project to consider bike lanes on Garfield Avenue as part of this project. We'll get to that in a moment. Revalia Street in Fair Oaks was a very popular project. It was actually moved up to priority 1. The concern with this project was limited to the coordination with Caltrans, but other than that, project was favorable in terms of its improvements. There was one comment about whether this could be included in the Measure R work associated with the on and off ramps, but we clarified this is essentially a separate effort and really doesn't need to be delayed for that whole project to be worked out. There was a lot of emphasis in the discussion about pedestrian and active transportation improvements that should be made. At some point during the discussion, there was a thought to just allocate a large percentage of the funding to bike lane improvements. City staff reiterated that a lot of that work can be done in coordination with our street resurfacing work or our restriping efforts. So it's just an additional treatment and design work on top of work already are underway. So it might not make sense for us to dedicate a lot of Measure M funds in particular for that type of work. That was largely accepted by the council, especially given that there's probably other funding available for that. And the city has a lot of work to do in terms of modernizing its mobility and bike plan. So a lot of the bike emphasized recommendations sort of fell away, but one was attached specifically to the Garfield project. I think it was from Oak to Monterey specifically that we're considering adding bike lanes. But with that said, there was concern that these particular locations were selected and these particular devices were selected. But it's our understanding that the commission's direction is really just to see some of this money go towards pedestrian device improvements in the city. And these were some of the locations and devices that came to mind when this commission observed issues such as people trying to cross Huntington, trying to cross Fair Oaks in locations where it's difficult to cross right now because there is no controlling device. And that it's not necessarily RFBs that are that utilizing this money isn't necessarily contingent on using RFBs in particular, that if there's other more appropriate devices for different types of intersection configurations, one idea was like a hybrid device or a Hawk device that might be more visible, but also granted much more expensive, that we should open up this item and make the submission to the governing board a little more broad so that we could utilize the money for a number of different things as long as they were pedestrian device focused items. So that was the direction from council on that. We didn't spend too much time on the last two items as the reserve projects. As I explained for number 7, we believe a lot of this is going to be accomplished. This ADA compliant curb racks will be accomplished through CDBG funding. And the Meridian Avenue and Oak realignment we explained is a quite intensive project because of the street and catch basin configuration there. So one thought the council had was if any money sort of falls away, especially from project number 1, the Orange Grove project, that perhaps we want to direct that to number 6. And then I think the final item from council to communicate to you, we had let them know that, of course, there's additional funding beyond the 1.7 million that is coming our way from future funding years. And the council provided that they would like to see that going towards bike lanes and that sort of mobility improvements on transportation infrastructure. So with that said, I'll return back to the top 2 projects because that was what the council had asked the commission to focus on. So I'll add for Orange Grove, there were some public comments which were attached to this packet at the end that did not view this project as favorable with concerns about widening. One comment was concerned about reducing the usage of the pedestrian walkway in that area. A couple comments were concerned about, widening the road would lead to speeding cars or perhaps could lead to accidents, even explaining that there are already accidents and demonstrate evidence for that by poles getting knocked down and some of the traffic collision data that we have. We emphasize to the council that there's very much a great concern about the way this street merges so suddenly just south of Oliver Street. Vice Chair Fisher had pointed out that this configuration is actually not compliant with MUTCD standards. And our staff took a brief look at that, but did not have enough time to do an analysis. We can do that if you want to give us that direction to provide to council. We pulled some of the state traffic collision data and pulled some of the redacted police records on this, and there's quite a few, but we didn't have the time to analyze that information for this commission, but certainly we can do something like that if you want to produce that to council. But ultimately, I should reiterate that council's direction was to essentially eliminate this project unless some other configuration can be found that doesn't include the widening. One recommendation was that the merge is moved from South Pasadena north of Columbia Street into the city of Pasadena. So they directed city staff to have that conversation with Pasadena. We did have that earlier today. Speaking about it, not a whole lot of time to prepare, but we had that conversation today. They've looked at this in the past. Their primary concern is in reducing southbound Orange Grove to 1 lane. It just has a lot of issues with that concept, but one of the major issues is that now you're reducing all of your movements, your southbound movement, your westbound movement, which we would want to limit anyway into a residential neighborhood, but also your eastbound movement down Columbia really limits it to 1 lane. So there's some challenges with that. It also might detract from the overall goal that's shared by both cities in reducing this sort of spreading of traffic throughout the city down Pasadena into the Grand Avenue neighborhood, and really providing a safe corridor between South Pasadena and Pasadena to and from the 110, which is the predominant movement in that area. So they, but they did add that they have similar concerns about the intersection at Orange Grove. We have talked about intercity improvements to Orange Grove regarding the signal phasing, particularly the radius of the curb on the northwest section of Orange Grove and Columbia. And so there's some discussion underway about reconfiguring that. So in short, the city of Pasadena is, into the concept of doing some sort of joint project in this area along Orange Grove. But, given our council direction that the widening in South Pasadena is not preferable, and Pasadena's comments that the narrowing in Pasadena is not preferable, they suggested that perhaps we try to allocate some money for some sort of undefined project that would be determined at a later date. So that's one possibility here. So I've kind of gone on enough about this. I'll sort of turn it back to you as far as the discussion item, but just to reiterate once more, the council is looking for a reconfiguration of the Orange Grove project that does not include the widening, or perhaps removing it from the list, or some other type of suggestion. And then for Columbia Street, it largely stays as is, but the council is looking for additional information on why that project is a benefit to the community, besides, say, improving, driveway turn access was one of the things that they had mentioned, with a two-way turn lane along Columbia. So I'm open to answering questions, but this might be an appropriate time to sort of turn it back over for discussion, unless you need some more information from me.
Well, thank you, Ted. That's a great presentation, and it's a lot of information. So that's been very helpful in terms of directing our conversation. At this point, I want to make sure all of us has an opportunity to ask questions. We're going to have a lot of discussion, I'm sure. I just had a couple very high-level quick questions for you. One, and I apologize, I did not specifically see what went to the city council on this topic for their March 2nd meeting. Did you include the project descriptions that this commission prepared and approved back in August in what you presented to the city council?
Yes. So this is the report, starting on page 4 of the packet that went to city council. We did modify the project descriptions that were developed by the commission into what you see here. So we captured all of the technical information, including what the projects would include, but they're worded in such a way for general consumption, and also like this is what we were going to include in our Measure M submittal. So it references, so the language has just been sort of tweaked and organized in a different way. But I'm open to comments on this, but I feel largely that it captures the project descriptions that were recommended by the commission.
Okay, so it was something like a summary or shortened version of the project descriptions that we had prepared.
Well, we didn't shorten them. We kept them the same length. We just reorganized the wording. So like, for example, I think one of the longer ones is Columbia Street. So the size is similar. It's just a matter of reorganizing the sentences to describe
Okay.
it in a different
The reason
way.
I was asking,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you, is just
Sure.
because I don't, it did, so bottom line, they didn't get what we prepared. They got what you guys prepared, staff prepared based on what we prepared.
Yeah, that's correct. So
Okay.
if that was a misstep, then that's on us. But
No,
well,
it's not about that. I just wanted to, because
Sure.
they're asking questions in part, and concerns were raised by the public that are based on misunderstanding and misinformation and non-information. So like some of the questions they're asking are answered in the project descriptions that we took time to prepare. But it sounds like the reason they're asking them, at least in part, is because they didn't get verbatim what we prepared. So
Sure, that
they're
could
trying to find
be.
an understanding and explanation as to why some of these issues or questions have been raised. That's all.
Sure. So that could be a gap, in which case, on our second round back to the council, we'll want to make sure that, we're in line in terms of what our descriptions are. And if we need to add in the previous descriptions or just modify our revised descriptions here. I will say that the idea here is to, if we embellish or added anything, it was a little flexibility in the project description so that there was some room in the Measure M funding approval. So if something was deemed infeasible, we could flex a little bit without having to amend our metro agreement. So there might be some, broad language used here. And that was the purpose of that.
Okay, no problem. I'm thinking there may be a way, and then we'll move on to the other commissioners, that there may be a way, at least for one of these items, to easily respond to the inquiry because we already have it. That's all. And so the last question, at least for now, is at the end of the day, we had a list, and again, I'm looking at our project descriptions. We had a list of 6 items. So there were 5 items, and then item 6 was what we called reserve projects. And those were the meridians at Oak realignment and the meridian access ramps. Okay, so if you take off the reserve projects for a moment, there were 5 projects. And from your report of what happened at City Council, just to sort of bottom line it, the focus, or what we should be focusing on tonight, is the Orange Grove project, which is number 3 on our list, and providing an explanation for Columbia Street, which is number 2 on our list. And as to everything else, there's no material change or request for information. Is that a fair read of what City Council concluded and is looking for from us?
Yes, but that doesn't prevent you from adding additional flavor or information about projects if you'd like that to be heard at council.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Ted. All right. I see 2 hands, and I don't know who was first. So I'm going to go with... What's that?
John was.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate the honesty. Vice Chair Fisher.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would ask that as we discuss these 2 items, that we discuss Columbia Street first. I think it's the least controversial item among the lesser controversial item among the 2. And I'd ask that we discuss Columbia first and then Orange Grove to kind of get Columbia out of the way, if you would agree with that.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. Any questions for Ted at this time? John? Sorry, I'll move on. I just want to make sure John was...
No,
taken care of.
I have nothing else at this point in time.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, I think Kim was up next. So Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I just wanted to interject the point that it looks like also there was a lot of pushback on this signal at Garfield, that needs to also be discussed because it seems like there's a lot of pushback on that. In looking at the comments we had, I mean, there was a lot of, duplicate, obviously, letters that different entities sent in and different community members. What flexibility, and you referenced this earlier, Ted, is it seems like there's a lot of comments about obviously using the money for bike lanes. But what limitations do we have? Because I thought there was an issue about the active transport, what we could and could not use the funds for. And if we were to go down that direction, what flexibility do we have? And I know you referenced the surfacing and we could make improvements, but beyond that, what kind of flexibility would we have to look at that? Or would we just look at an allocation of saying, let's rethink this and this amount of money and leave it ambiguous, but say bike lanes versus specific streets and bike lanes? And then we have to, look at all the implications of the striping and parking and all those different things.
Sure. So I guess there's two things to touch on here. I think at one point there was probably some more restrictions on what the funding could be utilized for, but now it seems fairly open. A lot of the cities are actually utilizing, or some of the cities are utilizing the money for, general improvements like transit. One city is purchasing buses. I think another city is proposing a sound wall, probably for the 210. So those are like general uses. And so I think as far as a general use, we could probably, for example, for the RFB one, we could probably identify that we want to allocate a certain amount of money for these types of pedestrian devices. Bike lanes, we might be able to do that, but I have a feeling that, and it may get through the governing board that way, but I have a feeling as we get closer to the metro approval process, that we'll need a much more refined project scope of like what type of bike lanes, where generally are they going to be located. So I think where it's kind of like a device or an investment in equipment, I think you got much more flexibility. But I think if it's an infrastructure improvement, Metro is probably going to be seeing like, well, okay, where are you seeing this and how long, are you going to, how much linear distance are you going to implement, that kind of thing.
Would we be at risk of losing funds and timing if we go in that kind of direction, just for clarity?
No, we wouldn't lose the funds. It would just take longer to get them programmed. So for example, we haven't programmed any funds for this regional program to date, and we've got 7 years of cycle funds at our disposal. So if we tried to program it that way, and we weren't successful, we wouldn't necessarily have to wait for another year. We could try to amend it, but that's a several month process to sort of hit the mid-year. I don't think it's technically a cycle, but I think that Metro would allow us amendments maybe like a few months in or maybe mid-year after the process. So you wouldn't lose anything. You just delay your ability to utilize the funds.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome. Thank you, Kim. Commissioner Dunlap.
Thank you, Chair. Ted, just a quick question regarding implementing bike lanes with a pavement project. Am I correct in assuming that there are additional costs for that beyond a typical pavement project work? For example, doing adjustments at the intersection, whether that be some signal work with the detection, and that a pavement project with a bike lane it costs a little bit more. It's not exactly a 1-for-1. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, that's correct. Especially as we start to, as I mentioned, like different types of classes for bike lanes. because there's different levels of evaluation there. Certainly if there's, parking removal, then you get into environmental impacts of the project. And as you mentioned, if you're going to start implementing different types of sensing devices and things like that, there's a design impact and also installation impact. So yes, that's correct, depending on the circumstance.
Yeah, and kind of knowing your upcoming pavement program list, are there projects in the pipeline that are on the bike master plan network, or those that are due to have relatively ease, that are low hanging fruit to implement? Have those been compared?
I don't know, to be honest. I know that our bike master plan is pushing a decade old. I don't know if it'll be aligned with our upcoming general plan changes. Our council adopted strategic plan for this year directs us to actually reevaluate that mobility plan. So there'll be changes there. I do know there's some sort of obvious ones, like, Huntington is an obvious one for bike lane improvements. And so that's something that we would probably try to accomplish through that Fremont Huntington modification to the grant scoping that I mentioned at the earlier in the evening. So that's something that's sort of a little bit more obvious if that would work out. So I don't know if that helps, but we don't have a real clear direction on where future bike lanes would go at this point. We do have that plan, but it does really need to be reevaluated.
Yeah, no, it does. And I ask because to the extent like bike lanes get pushed to, those can be accomplished in a future pavement project. I think the next question is always, well, what is that pavement project? And are we doing that right now with our upcoming projects? And if we're not, can we wait on the future? But thank you.
Of course, yeah. It's a good point. I think in general, we tried to convey and I know that it took a long time for this list to be developed. And there was, I was even part of the end of those discussions about prioritization and different concerns from different commissioners. So I'll say that we tried to iterate to the council, the commission's general consensus that the projects were focused on safety improvements from the perspective of, I use the word like pinch points in the city, areas that needed vehicular improvements, but there were some projects on there that were pedestrian focused. So it was kind of a balance, but certainly there's some concerns, and they're including the public comments here about emphasizing bike lane improvements too. So it's not an easy, it's a difficult challenge to find where you want to spend money. There's so many different ways to do it.
Thank you both. Any other questions for Ted at this time? Commissioner Hughes.
One point to make, and this is before Ted's time, and also before Commissioner Dunlap's time, but there was a point where the entire budget for our streets in an annual budget was $8,000. That was it. So we've really been making up over the last 10 years, a lot of funding that didn't exist. Same thing with our water system. Going back, we basically robbed water, robbed everything to fight the 710 as a city. And now we have to make up for that. So obviously we can't do everything at one time, and bike lanes and everything else is really important, but I just want to make sure, because we started this list for Measure M in 2017-ish, guys, approximately, when Metro demanded by a certain deadline how we would use funds, and it was in collaboration with other commissions, the freeway transportation. And I think we just need to keep everything in perspective. And because we've also heard, as we talk about Orange Grove, about all the accidents that have happened there. And part of the safety measure was supposed to reduce accidents when they put in the median. So, we've kind of gone round and round, and we have, and I know there's comments about studies, but we do know and have always trying to get accident information. So we have good data. But I think we can rethink things to address the needs, but I just want to be cautious and kind of think of everything in a totality, and also make sure that we don't go down a path where we lose funding, we lose timing, we lose focus. So I just kind of want to give that perspective, because it's been a long time to get even to here.
I'll just say amen to that. Vice Chair Fisher, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, since it's time to ask Ted questions, Ted, would you agree that there are many sources for funding bike lanes?
Yes, in my limited amount of experience in this area, I think more and more the trend is that there is increased funding availability for those types of projects, especially with some of the new direction that we're seeing Metro leading in.
And would you agree, Ted, that that compared to a new signal or other physical modifications, bike lanes are relatively inexpensive?
Yes, I'd agree with that. Just in general, I'd agree with that. The signal costs we're looking at are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars right now. One of the ongoing city initiatives right now with regard to bike lanes is just a temporary implementation through the Slow Streets program, just to see how bike lanes work. And that's very relatively inexpensive, and even allows us to test the waters with bike lane implementation. Whereas signals, as you all know, a complicated process. And, once a warrant has been established, we have limited time and need to find budget in order to implement signals. So
Okay.
I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you. And you would also agree that bike lanes that are contemplated, if they're part of the city's plan, can be implemented when street resurfacing occurs at virtually no cost to the city. Agreed?
I'd say the striping is a negligible cost. We had discussed real briefly here other costs to be considered. If there's additional studies that have to be implemented as a result of putting bike lanes in or other devices, there's more cost, but again, not a substantial cost when compared to other types of improvements.
Okay. And then to couple a bike lane project on Garfield with a new signal, if determined to be warranted, at Garfield and Monterey, could unnecessarily delay the bike lane project if it were feasible, because we know from our experience with Orange Grove and Monterey that from the point we're discussing it now until such time that it might be implemented could be 4, 5, or 6 years, whereas the bike lane could go in almost any fiscal year that you choose if it were determined to be feasible. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I'd agree with that. And, part of the reason in how we were wording some of the language here for our Measure M submission was to make things a little more broad, in that we don't necessarily have to couple those together. If it's council's direction that they both get done, we can get the funding allocated, but we don't necessarily have to do them together.
Okay. And then I'm going to raise an issue. You and I have had some offline discussion on this, but I think since it was in the some of the public comments, I wanted to raise it now. And that is that there's been no study, such as at Garfield and Monterey. No such study has been conducted to determine if the signal is appropriate or not. I totally agree with that. And one of the frustrations that I, and I think maybe others on the commission have had, is that we're asked to make policy decisions, well, not make them, but recommend them to council, yet we don't have the fundamental information that we need for them. And it would be helpful to have that type of information in advance of the meeting, such as, is a signal warranted? And we go round and around. We've been discussing a signal there for 2 years. A study should have been conducted. That study needs to come first before we talk to the city of San Marino. They may not be interested if we have no study to show that it's warranted, yet they may be very interested if we show that it meets a warrant, because then there's liability to both agencies if they don't move forward to put in a signal that is justified. But the other thing was, we are asked to make recommendations to council, yet we don't have the collision data, and the collision data can be very compelling. And so I know you've indicated a desire, Ted, to try to do the analysis and get it to us. But I would agree with comments that have been made that you're recommending something, yet you don't have the analysis. I think collision data can be very compelling. I know that from my observations on certain streets, and perhaps with Chair Abelson's observations, we know there are accidents, but it's compelling to have the accident data so that the council can say, gee, 15 accidents, I can't ignore this. And so I think we need to make a concerted effort to make sure we have compelling collision information so that we can share that information with the city council. And I know you've indicated a willingness to do that, but I think it's vital that we have that, and that has been raised by Commissioner Dunlap and some of the other citizens who responded. So I just look forward to, having that done in the future. Thank you.
So just to close the loop on that concept, I very much support that project decisions should be based on data, and we should be conducting traffic studies in order to make those project decisions. One thing that I run into quite often actually is, it's very easy for a project not to move forward because of a comment that we don't have enough data or a study has been conducted. I think in this case, we're asking for funding to be programmed in order to get to that state of doing a study and then the project. So that can be a bit of a frustrating thing for staff. And I know you all understand that when we're really just at the very start of the work in terms of trying to get the funding so that we can fund that traffic study that costs money in order to move forward with the project. So that's the circumstance we find ourselves in here. And so I can understand your frustrations when asked to make recommendations without that data. And it's almost like a catch-22 because we need the recommendations to get the funding so we can do the study. But certainly in this case, given that the commission's emphasis on how important this project is and the council's direction that, looking unfavorably about that project, and that's where my, my comments come back that we're willing to do our best to support the project on the commission's behalf, if that's your direction, to try to do that analysis now as a preliminary step to support the project, even though our ultimate goal would be to receive the funding so that an analysis can be conducted towards that project. I'm kind of jumping around here, but hopefully my point is made that this is a really early funding request, but we can help with that analysis if that's the direction you want to go.
And again, if I can assist in any way, or maybe Commissioner Dunlap, in helping you interpret the collision data or helping you with any provisions of the manual on uniform traffic control devices, I'm semi-retired, so I'm available. So you're welcome to call on me at any time.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
I want to go to Commissioner Hughes. I just want to note this is the time to ask Ted questions, and that I'm going to provide a sort of suggested framework for our conversation so we can be, excuse me, somewhat organized and come to a decision before 1 a.m. So with that, well, Commissioner Hughes, any final questions for Ted, at least for now?
Just kind of an adjunct to what we're talking about. Historically, one of the issues and frustrations has been often we've been told and we've experienced that funds that are allocated from certain sources, whether it's M or R or other grant money, et cetera, that the money cannot be used for studies. So we've pushed back and have heard many times that the funds can't be used for studies. And then there's no funds that we have in the budget enough to do studies. We get caught in this catch-22 where you're trying to allocate and plan projects or look at potential projects or funding potential mediations, and yet you can't do the study and there's no money for the study. So I just want to be sure that, because my understanding was a lot of these, unless of course things have been evolving and changing, that I thought a lot of the Measure M money could not go to studies. So that's where I'm kind of scratching my head, because that was always one of the limitations we've had with some of the money coming in and looking how to allocate it, is that the limitation was it could not be used for studies. Now, if that's changed, that's wonderful.
It can be very confusing. So the Measure R money can't be used for studies unless that study directly impacts the environmental review for the committed project, I guess I'll say. So in other words, you couldn't use Measure R money to determine if you want to do a project. You could use Measure R money once you're committed to a project and you're basically evaluating the impacts of that project. You could
So
use
like
that
an
for-
EIR.
Exactly. For Measure M, especially with the way this money has been allocated, my understanding is that yes, we can utilize it for studies in this respect. It's a little bit more flexible to the city's discretion, but pending Metro approval, which I've yet to go through that process. This will be my first time, so we'll see how that goes. But given my conversations with the other cities who have been through the process multiple times, we can utilize the money for these types of studies.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome. Okay, so I jotted down some notes. It sounds like for sure we need to talk about providing some additional explanation for the proposals for Columbia Street, which I think are found in project descriptions already prepared. That's number one. Two, the Orange Grove between Columbia and the 110 Freeway proposal and the council's reaction to that and how we want to deal with it. So those are the two ones that for sure we need to cover. Then it does not sound like council asked us to revisit for the umpteenth time Garfield and Monterey, but I want to see if there is a desire, and I have no desire to revisit it once again. But if there are others on this panel that want to, I want to make sure we do that. Kim, you mentioned it, and I know Eric had it in his comments to council. So is that something you two or anyone here would like to discuss again, or no, we're fine with where it landed?
I would just say that perhaps one of the adjuncts we could explore or make a comment regarding would be the consideration for bike lanes.
Okay, so you want to discuss it. I just want to see if you want to discuss it.
If they're going to go through that project now, again, as was mentioned earlier, the timing for bike striping, et cetera, could be much more rapid than obviously the installation of the signal. But I also find, and maybe that's again where we look at a study, because one of the issues are traffic collisions and data there, because the comments are we're going to have speeding, but I don't know if we're going to have much more speeding with a signal than we have with the stop sign issue. So I mean, I'm happy to, or we could put that off, whatever my fellow commissioners think.
All right. Commissioner Dunlap, is it something you want to talk about?
No, I think probably everything's been stated as far as that project. I think it's important to have some sort of study before you move forward with it.
Okay,
Some sort of traffic signal study. And I know too, there was at least, I don't want to misspeak for council, but there was some interest in ensuring that the residents who live around that location were also supportive and also felt like it would enhance their streets versus detract or increase speeding.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Dunlap. I was actually going to mention that because I was going back to my notes to make sure we cover everything. And that was something I neglected to mention, was that contingent upon cooperation with San Marino and also on approval by residents. Thank you for adding that.
so what does that mean? So even though we recommended it multiple times and it's been already approved by council 3.5 years ago, they're saying, okay, but only if what, some percentage of the residents in some radius decide it's okay? Is that what they're saying?
I don't think there's a standard by which they would like. I think the intent that I gathered was that there is an effort to conduct outreach with those residents as to, the plan to implement a light. This gets a little complicated, and I think it's due to because of the nature of a warrant analysis, that complicates that process. But I think that the intention was that the residents are somehow involved in the process, was what I gathered from council.
Oh, okay. So we're going to talk about Garfield and Monterey then, at least for a moment, because there seems to be some, I think we need some clarity on it. And then the last couple of things I've heard talking about is bike lanes. Is there anything, because Ted, the way I think you left it with us is that that's not something that they were going to, the council wanted to hear more about at this time, but maybe I got it wrong.
Their final, bike lanes were a big discussion about, what to do, but the final decision was that there's provisions for bike lanes on Garfield as part of that project. And then for the future spending, which is yet to be considered, that MTech prioritizes bike lanes.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Primet has his hand raised.
Hi, just a point for Ted to research. Since I made the motion that carried on this reprioritizing, I seem to remember we may have done allocation of the Orange Grove merge amount into a bike lane amount. We may have spliced it into a bike lane amount and an amount still remaining for the Orange Grove not the widening project, but that whole.
Up, you went mute.
Yeah, someone actually muted me.
It wasn't me.
So, yeah, so Ted, I think you're muted now too. So to take a look at that, because I want to make sure there's no hard dollars that got slipped into bike lanes now that I'm hearing all this discussion. The bike proponents came out big time, and that was good, but we want to make sure it's a balanced source of funding and not just Measure M dollars, which are pretty scarce.
Thank you, John. Eric, your hand is raised, but I'm not sure if that's from before. Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, so it sounds to me like, Ted, unless you instruct differently, there isn't anything we need to specifically discuss regarding bike lanes. Is that fair?
So, in listening to it a couple times, I think that there was at some point there was a discussion, Mayor Pro Tem Primet, about the remainder of Project 1 being focused to other projects. I think in the concluding motion, the idea was to make bike lanes a priority for future year funds. But what I can do is we can go through it one more time and make sure. But to answer your question, Chair Abelson, I don't know that there was any commission direction in terms of the consideration of bike lanes. I think it was just a council decision regarding bike lanes, if any. Does that
Okay.
match what you're thinking, Mayor Pro Tem Primuth?
Yeah, I think so. It was a long meeting, and it was a very long motion to which several council members contributed. So I'll just wait for the minutes, and they didn't come out in tomorrow's meeting. So I'll defer to you, Ted, that you heard it correctly.
Yeah, I have a preliminary draft of what would become the minutes. And it says make bike lanes a priority for future year funds. But I really should go back and make sure that we get that right.
I think that's right. And I know Commissioner Dunlap probably has some contribution. He may have heard the whole meeting.
Yeah, please, sir. I fell asleep around the 11 o'clock hour. But I went back and listened the next day. Yeah, please go back and listen. I seem to remember at least discussion of a portion to be set aside, maybe a quarter.
There was, yes.
Or something like that.
Okay, so is there anything for us, if that's a decision city council has made, I don't know if there's a dollar figure associated with that or not. Is there something they're asking us to do in that regard or no?
My understanding is no.
Okay. I just want to make sure we do what we're being asked to do.
Of course, yes.
and not go off in all kinds of interesting directions. Vice Chair Fisher.
But I'm hearing that the council stated that they want bike lanes to be high priority for funding or something to that effect. It doesn't necessarily have to come from Measure M. And I think it might be helpful when it's presented to council the next time that maybe you can show them all the funding available for bike lanes and then move to Measure M. I recognize we don't have funding in our proposal for Measure M for bike lanes because there's so many other funding sources for bike lanes. And besides, we don't have the slightest idea where they're supposed to go because we haven't seen the bike lane plan. And two, we don't know if they'll fit. I don't know if it'll fit on Garfield. Do we have to remove parking? You know, I have no idea. So I don't think we could make a decision on where to program funds for bike lanes under Measure M. But I think it would be helpful when you present this to council to first preface it with all the funding sources available for bike lanes and the amounts that are available for that. And maybe then they might be more receptive to using the Measure M funds for, you know, other types of projects.
Thank you, John. Kim, your hand is raised.
Just a quick point. If they want us to look and sort of eliminate the project for Orange Grove and rethink the dollars for bike lanes or allocate a portion, one of the things going back a ways when they were working on the general plan was that they were going to incorporate or update, please correct me, Ted, the bike plan, which as was mentioned is 2011, into so that it would sync to the general plan. And then I thought once that came together, that plan then was going to somewhat come to us as part of looking at that in its totality, and then looking at what we could do future for projects where funding was going to happen. But I feel like some ways we want to do the bike lanes and plan to always, and is supportive back when the plan was originally developed in 2011, but that we're sort of like shotgunning it, saying, okay, we're going to do all this, but again, know the timing when the general plan with, I thought that updated bike plan was going to come together.
Yes, you're correct. So that is on the council strategic plan for Public Works and Community Development, I believe for this year, is to revisit that plan. And my understanding is also that it's after adoption of the general plan. So yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a couple of comments on bike lanes since we're actually talking about it, but we're not talking about it. But I just wanted to confirm one other topic as to whether it's something we need to talk about or not. RRFBs, Ted, or anyone, is that something that we've been asked to tackle in any way, shape, or form? Or no? That's for Ted.
No, you haven't been asked to tackle that. Right now, just to clarify, the council direction is to submit that request for pedestrian improvements, whether they are RFBs or some other device, and then to leave and the ability to broadly select locations in the city, but just to make sure that funding gets allocated. So, in order to satisfy the submission requirements, we'll probably likely list the recommended locations in addition to another location that was suggested, Fair Oaks and Gravalia. But I don't think the funds will be committed in that way. We'll have to determine a future process as to
Wait,
selecting
that's
those.
not right. Fair Oaks and Gravalia?
I'm sorry. Gravalia
and
and Park.
something else.
Yeah, I've got too many intersections on my mind here. Yes, Gravalia and Park.
Got it, okay.
Yeah.
So bottom line, they're okay with our list for now, and they want to add that one, and all of these are placeholders.
They want it to be more flexible for both location and the technology under the measure on request.
Okay, Eric has his hand raised.
Thank you, Chair. And kind of going back to or thinking through your comments at the council meeting with the RFBs, I agree that someone should probably look at it. And I think you made the assumption that the commission isn't necessarily married to that type of control. And I won't speak for anyone else, but I'll say that I think that's correct for me. Like, I would be supportive of any sort of like positive pedestrian control at any of those locations, as well as any other marked uncontrolled crosswalks throughout the city. And I think that's probably, thinking through if we're going to apply the doctor-patient approach where we don't get so focused on what it's going to be at the end, but really go in with a little bit more general, with a little bit more flexibility, so someone can do an analysis and like look at it and figure out what is right. I think it's good to have some sort of like flexibility as far as pedestrian enhancements at those locations.
Thank you, Eric. And I'm just going to chime in, similar to the comments raised in connection with some of the other proposals. We didn't have any study or detailed analysis or meaningful data before us when we suggested that particular device or those particular locations. They were based on suggestions by commissioners and based on experience. So are those locations ultimately the correct ones? I don't know. Maybe they are. Maybe they're ones that are more needy. I don't know. But I guess it sounds like there isn't any need to discuss it further because we're on the same wavelength in terms of the need to or proceed with the RFBs or some similar device and to use these locations with the addition of the one from the council as proposed locations for now, right? And then assuming the funding's approved, then there would be some further analysis to determine, are these the right locations and what device will be used? Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So with that, we don't need to discuss RFBs anymore. It sounds like. So I have three things left, and which are probably the most important ones. And to honor the commitment made to Vice Chair Fisher, I would say I suggest we start with the reasoning behind Columbia Street and City Council's proposed deeper prioritization, with which I violently disagree. And then we can talk about Garfield Monterey for whatever we need to discuss with that. And then we can finish off with Orange Grove. Is that okay with you guys?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you. Okay, let me just clear the hands here. Okay, so first Columbia Street. Ted, you advised that the council wants more information on the benefits associated with what we're proposing along Columbia Street in terms of safety, and I can't read the other word. But that's basically what are the benefits. They needed a better understanding of why we're proposing it or what the benefits are for those proposals. Is that it? Am I close?
Yes, safety and calming features. We emphasize the
Calming, that's the word, sorry. I couldn't remember.
the commission's emphasis on this project. And in general, there was a concern about utilizing, Measure M funds for something like this. So I think they're just looking for additional support as far as benefits of the project.
Okay.
If
so-
you want me to, I can also share the previous project description if you find that helpful. So just let me know if you need me to pull that up.
Yeah, do you have that? The ones that we
I do, yes.
issued? Because I think, and I'm going to get to Vice Chair Fisher, whose hand is raised. I just thought I'd just frame it really quick. I think the questions are answered in the description itself. Most of paragraph 2, the beginning of paragraph 3, most of paragraph 4, and most of paragraph 5 in our project description describe what we're proposing and the benefits associated with those proposals. So we can go through it. I just wanted to sort of point that out, and thank you for putting it up there, Ted. So with that, I'll go to Vice Chair Fisher.
Yes, thank you, Chair Abelson. Maybe we could keep this on screen share while I talk. 3 things. We've tried to look at the bottlenecks within the city and to address them one by one. The big bottleneck that we have, the biggest bottleneck in the city, as we know, is at Fair Oaks Avenue and the Arroyo Seco Parkway. And we have a big project, our loop on ramp that we believe will significantly improve that. And then we also have the Grevillea Fair Oaks project that's on this list. The second big bottleneck in the city is on Mission at Meridian because of the Gold Line crossings. And at some point, we're going to discuss with Ted and Tatovik. We're going to meet at the location and discuss the improvements that are needed there that were programmed a number of years ago, but somehow didn't get implemented. And then the other big bottleneck we have is at Columbia, where it meets Pasadena Avenue and Fremont. And that would provide left turn lanes without taking away any parking. It's a freebie, no adverse impacts. Many years ago, I was involved in a study when I worked for Los Angeles that looked at the safety benefit of providing left turn lanes, left turn channelization, 2-way left turn lanes. And it showed that with all the projects where those were implemented, that there was a 28% reduction in collisions, because when you don't have left turn lanes, you get disorderly flow. And I've sat at 3 or 4 cycles going eastbound on Columbia, trying to get through the signal at Pasadena Avenue. I've sat through 4 cycles just to get through, and I didn't even want to turn left, but I have to stand behind everyone else who's wanting to turn left because there's no through lane there. As a result, people get frustrated. A few people cut through the community, admittedly in Pasadena, not in South Pasadena, but then they start to take disorderly flow and they pass on the right. so that they can get through. And so what this project would do is restore orderly flow. It would reduce collisions probably somewhere in the range of 28%. And it would reduce greenhouse emissions, because when you're sitting in traffic, stopped, waiting for 4 cycles to get through, you're burning gas, and we all know what it's like now to fill up our gas tank, and you're adding emissions. So it would have all those benefits. So I think that's captured here in the description that we provided, but I just wanted to state it in another way. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fisher. I would just add to that, in the project description here, where we describe the proposal for the restripe, we talk about the fact that, right now what we have on Columbia Street is one double yellow down the middle, and that's pretty much it, except at the intersections where there's a turn pocket for some directions, and that's it. And so what we have is uncontrolled speeding, dangerous movements, inefficiency, difficulty for people getting in and out of driveways. Within the last year and a half, there was a bad accident between someone exiting a driveway on the South Pasadena side and someone in one of the through lanes. So in this description, we talk about preventing unnecessary sudden stops for through vehicles, behind left turning vehicles in the current single lane, thereby reducing rear end collision potential and sudden evasive maneuvers. Then we also talk about the two-way left turn lane, which would serve residential driveways, right? So would increase safety moving in and out of those residences. And then if you move to the next couple of paragraphs, we'll talk about edge lining, which of course narrows the travel lanes, which necessarily reduces speeds. And I think then finally, we talk about control and safety at the intersection of Orange Grove and Columbia, where there have been multiple issues and conflicts between pedestrians and vehicles, and that's the signal timing adjustment. So I think, and the reason I asked the question quite some time ago was I think that a lot of it is answered in this description, and then of course, what Vice Chair Fisher just described, I think is fantastic in terms of providing additional data and support. We also have to remember that this is an area that's been completely disregarded by both cities for 50 years. And part of what we were trying to accomplish with Measure M is try to address traffic safety and related issues at areas in town that had been historically ignored and disregarded entirely. And we've come up with a number of proposals which are relatively efficient to implement and inexpensive. The traffic signal modifications, of course, are more expensive. But what's very interesting is that the city of Pasadena had already been looking at some striping modifications on Columbia at Pasadena, independent of this conversation. So, Ted, I don't know if that's helpful, if that's enough. If you think there's more that we should be explaining or providing to council to justify this project, which in my mind is an incredibly important one in a gateway to our community. What do you think?
No, I think that's sufficient. Might be echoing there. Is that okay? Okay. I think it's sufficient. We did capture a lot of those elements in the language that we reorganized. I did hear a couple, key phrases in there that probably aren't expressed as plainly as you said them. So we'll add in some more language here, emphasizing unnecessary sudden stops. We talked about mitigating turning conflicts, guiding drivers, congestion with left turns, and
Managing
with no
speeds.
reduction in parking, but we'll add in some of the things about, emphasizing the collision reduction, and then some new language about historic impacts of not being addressed and no improvements for many years.
Another key phrase in here is avoiding side swipes. So I would just, and then Councilmember Primuth, but I just wanted to say that it would be great if when you provide your follow-up report to council on this, that you include as an attachment our project descriptions in
Yes,
the
we can-
record, because right now
Yeah.
they're not. I know you did a great job putting it together. I'm just saying that if you can have exactly what we've provided, if you want to summarize it in your report, great, but it'd be great if that actual document was there somewhere for them to look at if they so choose.
No problem. We can definitely do that. And again, we were trying to avoid being sort of pigeonholed, like in places where we said we were going to reduce something to 10 feet. Like we didn't want that to be held over in a funding agreement where we need to do it 9 feet or 11 feet or something like that. So the purpose was just to preserve flexibility in the final product.
Absolutely, definitely. Okay, I have two hands, but I think Councilmember Primuth was first, so we'll go with him.
Yeah, I think it's great that you're adding in the more tangible benefits. And I apologize to the commission for not articulating the rationale for all of this. There was a council member who really focused on the fact that this is serving residential driveways and there may be 2 of them. And so that kind of took the council in the wrong direction. They were just focusing on a private benefit only. But I did point out that there was many other reasons for it. So I think beefing it up, you shouldn't have trouble getting back to the council on it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to echo the comment that Commissioner Fisher made, Vice Chair Fisher, about the statistics and experience with the designated left-hand turn lane with those numbers. That is an important fact to perhaps include for reference of the value of the mitigation efforts and the proposal, to include that information.
Yeah, given we have some time now, we can, and we'll talk about this on the next item too, but we can add in as much empirical data that we have at our disposal in it also.
Thank you.
Councilmember Primuth.
You're muted.
Councilmember Primuth, I'm calling in you. Hopefully you can hear me.
Sorry, I raised my hand and lowered it, but then I raised it again. My fault. User error.
Okay. All right. So unless there's anything that anybody else would like to contribute on this topic, it sounds like Ted has what he needs and we can move on. Is that a fair conclusion, Ted?
Yes, and
Okay.
hopefully we'll be earlier in the evening. We'll spend more time emphasizing the things you're emphasizing and not sort of losing. I again apologize also for not being on it as far as getting our point across, but
From everything I can tell you, Ted, you and Councilmember Primuth did an amazing job presenting and defending our position. So I want to thank you both for that. Okay, so next, I think I have 2 items left. One is just to make sure we sort of put a fine point on it and then move on, is Garfield Monterey. So, and maybe it's just to resolve my cognitive dissonance, but Garfield and Monterey, the proposed traffic signal has been on the list from day one. It was approved by City Council 3.5 years ago. And even when the prior Public Works Director did a little bit of a reshuffle on the projects, this remained. So from the very beginning to now, it's been on the list. From the very beginning until now, it was understood that it has to be done in coordination with the City of San Marino, since they share the intersection. And from day one, and I believe as part of the project description, it talks about the need to conduct the study, the warrant study to confirm what we believe to be the case, which is that a traffic signal is warranted. And what's interesting is, as I was looking in my accumulating pile of Measure M matters and files and papers and documents, I was looking at a report provided to us August 2020, which was a couple of months after we discovered that the projects had been changed. And part of the staff report talked about this proposal, and it said that they had made, staff had made preliminary analysis and observations at the intersection and determined that existing traffic and pedestrian volume at the intersection may meet warrants. And it also says in March 2020, so what, 2 years ago, staff received proposals to perform a traffic study and signal warrant analysis at Garfield and Monterey, but due to COVID, it was put on hold. So that's the background. That's the understanding. So I don't think I heard anything, Ted, that City Council commented that would change or alter any of that. Is that a fair conclusion or no? I think you're mute.
Yeah, I alluded to this in my earlier comment that, the council's concern was that the public is engaged in this process, but as we know, once we enter into the warrant analysis process, that sort of puts the city into an obligation per se in order to move forward with a traffic signal if it's warranted. So yeah, I mean, we haven't looked back at those historic records from 2020 to see what those proposals are, but it's easy enough for us to get a proposal together to perform a warrant analysis. It's just that if that analysis were to conclude that a signal is warranted, then we would want to move forward towards installation. So we need the money to do that. So yeah, I don't think anything changes based on what you're saying. I think that our understanding we'll take forward is that the council really wants us to make sure that we're engaging the residents that would be affected by this process.
Oh, okay. So that's obviously that's fair. So because at this point, what we're talking about is the list of projects that's going to go to the ABC JPA, right? That's the whole point of this conversation, yeah?
Yes.
And so from my perspective, and I'm just trying to be blunt and bottom line it, either something is on the list that's going to the ABC JPA or it's not, right? We've had 2 lists already, right? And now we're talking about a third. So from your understanding perspective, this signal is on the list that's going to the ABC JPA as determined by City Council. Is that?
Yes, if I were just to, throw this out there without having written the language, we would, it's included in the list that would return to council to get adopted for the JPA. And we would add language that through this project, staff would engage with the residents and, to receive feedback on, concerns with the light or something like that, the signal. There's also, they're expending the funds could be contingent on San Marino's involvement. Again, with the warrant analysis, it sort of, kind of takes things on its own path, but we would add language into the project description as is to address the council's concern that we pay attention to San Marino, or that we engage San Marino, which was a prerequisite anyway, that we pay attention to the residents' concerns and that we attempt to implement some sort of bike lanes in the area also. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, but probably with some additional language.
Okay, I think I get it. Commissioner Hughes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I kind of looking at this in sort of its perspective in that I think we were envisioning that part of this would be that you'd have to have a study, and that part of the study is you have to let the community know you're doing the study, because it goes both ways. Because if you get people engaged, at a certain point where they want it, and then they're disappointed that the numbers don't come out where it's warranted, then so there's got to be, and again, I think it was mentioned earlier that should we start this and say we're going to put it on the list as a consideration, with the caveat that we'd like to also look at with an add-on of a bike lane, but knowing that first we have to do the studies, and then as we alluded to earlier, that this can take years and could then go into the next round of funding per se. So I don't think it's adverse to us to look at this and know that this is sort of a long-term investment, and that is our most eastern sort of thoroughfare, and one that has not been touched. And I do believe, and correct me both, Chair Abelson and Vice Chair Fisher, that there had been I think there was a discussion and outreach to San Marino about this, they have not heard about this. I believe that there was discussions opened at some point by a previous public works director, maybe 2 ago, that contacted and was talking to San Marino. So I do think there's opportunity, but again, I don't think it has to be an all or nothing, that this can be, again, a phased in consideration project, if you will.
Thank you, Kim. And I think that's right. I recall, I think it was the prior director who said that there had been outreach to the city of San Marino, and the response to the city of San Marino is do the study. And, if it's warranted, it's warranted. And if it's not, it's not.
And I think it was also, well, if you pay for it, and we said, well, that was, the plan.
Right. And I would also, this is just another opportunity to talk about the project descriptions, because I'm looking, Ted, at what you had in your staff report to council versus what we have. And of course, what you have is a great summary. But what we have in ours is we talk not only about, we talk about improving traffic safety, reducing unnecessary stops, and reducing gas consumption, air emissions, and mid-block acceleration by providing traffic signal control. And how what happens now is people have to start and stop several times before reaching the stop sign. There's some unnecessary acceleration. There's spillover and cut through in the neighborhood. Things that are accomplished by this signal, and they don't show up in your report. And I think the council maybe doesn't think about all of these things unless they're put in front of them. And what they think about is what your report says and the handful of comments from the public, right? And so I think if they look a little, one, there's it sounds like at the end of the day it's on the list with the addition with the comments about coordinating with San Marino that we already know about, and really the only new aspect is letting the adjoining residents know about this. That sounds like the only new twist, really. Is that fair?
Yes. So, my concern here again was just seeing all the way to the end of the process. And I didn't want to be in a situation where we get to Metro and we're being asked to provide, the justification for reduced gas usage and things like that. Because once we get a city council approval, I don't want to mislead anybody by changing the description that we'll submit to Metro. I had full intention of submitting what we include on the council approved report to Metro. And so again, also not predicting that it would be this much work to get it through the council as an approval. So, if we have to expand it, certainly I think with project number 2, the Columbia project, it makes sense for us to expand it. That's what the council's requested. But in circumstances where I didn't think there was a need for additional justification to Metro for the project, I think it's pretty straightforward to say we want to spend this money on a signal study and potentially a signal. it's pretty straightforward. So I didn't think the justification was necessary for Metro, and that's why it wasn't included in the description. But certainly if you want to provide the direction to enhance the description to council to make that process a little smoother, it probably won't be an impact on the Metro approval process. So I just didn't want to, have that problem later on, if that makes sense. I think Chair Abelson might have froze. I thought you were just intently listening to me.
And Ted, I think going back, if I may, while he's coming back, I think when we originally planned this back with one of the original projects in 2017, that the funding was all going to be ours. We were going to take on the whole thing and it wasn't going to be shared. We were looking for their permission for the jurisdiction, but that we weren't asking them for funding. So I don't know if that also could be adjusted or if there's a consideration there. But also if this was, and correct me, was this the one that also the city council wanted to potentially take funding out of and reallocate, or is that goes back to the bike, but we think it'd be future funding?
So in our request, we included the whole 400,000. So I know that this description here says 100, 300, but we included the whole funder and 400. In our request, we said potential cost sharing with the city of San Marino. So I think San Marino has about a quarter of that intersection, whereas South Pasadena has 3/4, just because of the way the property or the boundary line is drawn. So yeah, we again allowing flexibility in the approval so that if it got to a certain point where we didn't have San Marino's cost sharing, we weren't halted because that's what the funding agreement says that we have to have in order to move forward. So it was really just about flexibility, not to change the scope in any way.
Absolutely. And I apologize. I was away for a minute and a half.
You froze.
So all I was saying was that, we didn't include a lot of those details with the concern that we would have to provide additional justification or additional data, for example, demonstrating that reduction in, fuel, or like a fuel reduction, can be demonstrated somehow.
Okay, I wasn't,
Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to reference it. And, if they get as part of their package, it's fine. So the sort of the conclusion of all this is they haven't asked us for anything specific or further on Garfield and Monterey. And as far as we know, unless they change, the intention is for it to be on the list that goes to the ABC JPA. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Unless anybody has anything further on this, we can move on to the big ticket item. Seeing none. Okay. So I think last and certainly not least is Orange Grove between Columbia and essentially the 110 freeway. So I think that's number 3 on our list. Is that right?
It's number 1 on the project. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. It's number 1 in terms of the priority, but number 3 on the list here. Thank you.
Okay. Just to add more confusion. So, okay. Ted is and then Councilmember Primuth can weigh in, please, too. I mean, where are we on this? Has this city council said absolutely 100%, we don't like this project and we're not doing it, for whatever the reasons are? Or are they looking for something more from us on this?
I think they're leaning towards the earlier, but I think there's an opportunity for the latter. As Vice Mayor Pro Tem Primuth had mentioned, there was a really long discussion on this. It sort of ended with the consensus that it would be removed. But then again, it got returned to MTech for comments and recommendations. I'll reiterate that they had asked if we could move the merge to Pasadena as an option. I don't think that's a viable option. So the thought was that perhaps there's another configuration that can be considered. I unfortunately don't have a recommendation on that. I am willing to take it back with additional data, certainly if we're able to complete technical analysis on it to demonstrate the importance of it. But I would recommend that if that is your desire, that the focus is on the public comments, because that was what really drove the council discussion as to the unfavorability of this project, was the comments that were submitted.
Okay, that's
So I
very-
add one more, that there was a concern of that it would basically undo the original project, which was installing the median.
right. Okay.
And narrowing the street.
Is that it? I didn't want to cut you off again.
Yeah, no problem.
So if the commission will indulge me, I would like to start with some initial comments on this. When I was advised that there were public comments submitted in opposition to some of our measure and recommendations, I was nothing short of shocked, because for innumerable reasons, many of which we all know, but in addition to the fact that we had numerous meetings of this commission and had not heard about any of these concerns from these commenters. And in fact, this proposal was made in direct response to the concerns of that neighborhood, both residents of Orange Grove and residents adjacent to Orange Grove on Prospect and such. We heard meeting after meeting about accidents routinely and the lack of safety. And so we spent a lot of time and effort to come up with a proposal to try to meaningfully address those concerns. So I was shocked, nothing short of that, to hear about the fact that there were comments. So then I went and looked, and Ted shared them with us. So it's interesting. So I looked at all the comments that were submitted to the city council for their March 2nd meeting. I counted a total of 12. So that's out of a city of 25,000 people. So that's first. Second, 9 of the 12 were solely and exclusively dedicated to the issue of bike lanes. And as I think Commissioner Hughes mentioned earlier, many of them were clearly from a forum, from some kind of special interest or advocacy group. And that's fine. That's okay. But it was just interesting is that 9 of the 12 were about bike lanes. They were not about Orange Grove. Then there were 3, including one from Commissioner Dunlap, and then there are 2 others. One just had a blanket, and by the way, none of the commenters were from that neighborhood. Not one. Not from Orange Grove, not from Prospect, not from the neighborhood east of Orange Grove, not from the neighborhood west of Orange Grove. So the first one was sort of a what's the best way to say it? Sort of a very general, I don't like the idea, and we don't know, we have no concept of street design. And then proceeded to say the merge should happen between Columbia and Oliver Street, which to me at a minimum is completely unreasonable and unfathomable. It's a very short stretch just south of Columbia, and you're going to ask the high volume of cars to pinch into one lane in that short segment. It makes very little sense. And as Vice Chair Fisher has mentioned and provided support for, that there are standards and specifications for merging traffic like that, and to do that in that short segment, it's infeasible. So that was one comment. The other comment against it was from somebody who lives on Oak Street, who validly and mistakenly was concerned about sidewalk removal. Well, this project, as described in our project description, and I don't think Ted changed that in his report to council, does not remove sidewalk. The sidewalk would remain. What is detailed is the narrowing of the extremely wide parkway, which is of course the area between the curb the street curb and the sidewalk. So there is no impact. There is no removal of sidewalk that's proposed. So I think the valid concern by that commenter was based on a misunderstanding of what was being proposed. And again, not somebody who lives on Orange Grove. And then Commissioner Dunlap mentioned, I think, concerns that he had mentioned previously regarding lack of a study and community outreach, which are both appropriate things to raise, but I think that could be said for everything that's being proposed. So I just wanted to start with that so that we understand that none of these comments came from anybody affected by these improvements, which are directed to the safety issues presented by multiple accidents. And I have, funnily enough, when I was looking at paperwork for tonight's meeting, there was a comment right in there from one of the homeowners expressing concern. I was going to read it, but I don't want to bore anybody. We've heard it and seen it before, right? Concerned about the multiple accidents, the speeding, the knocking down of street poles in front of her home and elsewhere. So it's already a very less than favorable condition, and that's with one lane and the narrowing. And now we've heard from Ted that, as we I think already knew, and if not, certainly anticipated, that the city of Pasadena is not receptive to reducing from 2 lanes to 1 Orange Grove north of Columbia. So we are left with a very unsafe situation on that street, which can be addressed by the proposal we made. And I think perhaps out of the couple of comments that were raised in opposition to this proposal, there may not have been an understanding. I mean, I'm sure, of course, Commissioner Dunlap knows, but others may not, that the street was originally 2 lanes in each direction. We're not changing. Really, what we're doing is putting it back to the way it was with enhancements and improvements, because this new configuration doesn't work. So that's sort of the thinking behind it. And I was also looking at, well, what are the Measure M criteria? And as Ted mentioned, it seems like it's loosened in recent times. But one of the major ones is reducing traffic incidents, improving safety, right? Relieving congestion, and the list goes on. And it seems like this project certainly tackles that. We looked at various other options for addressing this, and they all fell short. The problem is that it was a project that never should have been implemented. It was poorly designed and not very well thought out. And now we have to rethink it and restore safety to that thoroughfare. So that was sort of those are my initial thoughts behind it, and why I think it's critically important that we go back to the city council and say, you need to rethink this. And you can't base it on a couple of 2 or 3 comments from the public. You have to think about all of the considerations that we looked at, and how dangerous the condition is currently. And we've tackled other parts of town and improved safety successfully. So I think it's an important project. I think it needs to be done. I would prefer to keep it the way it is. It's beautiful, but it doesn't work. And you're narrowing traffic on a major street and connector to a freeway on ramp. And I'll be quiet in a second. Some of the other concerns is that with this 1 lane, traffic backs up, notwithstanding the anecdotal comment of one of the commenters. During peak hours, traffic backs up almost all the way, and has in the past backed up north of Columbia. Traffic is backed up. It's not only going south and going to the freeway, but it's also going past that, or at least that's the intention. There are those that are turning left at Oliver Street, and that narrow turn pocket backs up into one of the through lanes. It creates further problems. And then what you have with the backup is you have traffic spilling into neighborhoods, just like Garfield and Monterey. So there are a lot of reasons behind why we concluded that this was a project that was important to do. And I don't see how any of those reasons has disappeared. So in my mind, I think it's something that we need to pursue. All right, I'll be quiet. Let's see, Commissioner Hughes.
I think that Commissioner Dunlap was first.
Oh, sorry, Commissioner Dunlap, I didn't see your hand.
Thank you, Chair. And I understand that probably everyone on this call is supportive of this project, except for me. I will state that, I don't accept that adding an additional lane on this road could make it safer. I think I stated, my concern with the studies and not really having data to support it. We hear accident data. I haven't seen any data. I haven't seen any crash data. Some questions that come to mind is what types of crashes? What's the injury level? Are these probably someone getting their car dent up, or are these severe injury crashes? What were the modes? Are they, or what time of day? Are they drinking? All those sorts of things that would go into formulating some sort of recommendation for this. So I don't expect that we'll probably reach a consensus on this. I'd imagine I'm probably more ideologically opposed to this project than anything, but I think even if I were supportive of it, there's not, I wouldn't recommend to proceed with this until there was some sort of additional justification for this study. So I understand that everyone else is supportive of that, but that's somewhat my piece. And I don't know if I really expect to reach a consensus on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Dunlap. Commissioner Hughes.
To kind of add on to what was said earlier, just again, some background. The project itself was a segment of an offshoot, if you will, of the Fair Oaks project that gave us the bulb outs. And it was a complete surprise to the community when the reconfiguration took place at Orange Grove, south of Columbia, with the medians and the center medians put in. And there was an uproar at the time. People were very angry, but it was part of the plan. And as people were angry and focused, they got more focused, I think, on Fair Oaks. But it also caused a lot of outrage because originally the plantings that were planned were water thirsty plants. And that caused a huge uproar. And then we had to reconfigure and lobby to get those plants replaced with more California friendly, more drought tolerant. So the project itself was kind of a mistake and a nightmare in the very beginning. And, that was, long time ago now, but at the time they wanted to actually stop it and redo it and pull it out. And there was no money, just like people didn't want the bulb outs and there was no money. And I think there's a lot of people to refresh their memories. And if they knew, people aren't paying attention, I don't think as much as I would like them to city council agendas. But I think there's a lot of people out in the community that remember all this and would be supportive. And again, I do think data is helpful and we need data. And that's one of the things that we've always lacked is the money to have the studies. But this project, this area, this intersection, this pathway to the freeway has been an issue for a long, long time. So just to give that background, I just want to give that perspective. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Excuse me. Vice Chair Fisher.
Yes, thank you. In any city, you need a balanced transportation system, and we often talk about that. And that should include some pedestrian improvements, like helping pedestrians get across multi-lane, higher speed streets. with more positive control. We have that included. It includes bike improvements. There are many different sources of bike lane funding in the city, and a plan is underway, and they will be implemented at relatively low cost. And there's striping improvements with this measure and proposal, and traffic signal improvements. And a balanced transportation system can also include the occasional widening, a physical widening to address safety issues and pinch points in the transportation system. And that's the responsible thing to do. I don't understand the ideological concern about it. A balanced transportation system has to include all those components. And I think our Measure M proposal does just that. With regard to the collisions, I too wish we had the collision data. I think it would be compelling to look at the ran-off road collisions, the fixed object collisions, the side swipes when vehicles are trying to merge, the rear ends that occur when traffic is suddenly stopping quickly in front of you and you've got to jam on the brakes. It addresses all those types of collisions. And I'm sure if we had the 5-year collision data, it would bear that out. But we don't, so we're just going by our intuition at this point. Another compelling reason for the project, though, is as Chair Abelson indicated, the merge is inadequate. It was suggested by one commenter, public commenter, that in his letter to the city, that just merge them between Columbia and Oliver. Well, there's not enough room for that. And if you look at the length of the merge today, the way the project was built, it doesn't meet the guidelines in the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. It doesn't meet state and national standards. That in and of itself should be enough compelling reason to look at an alternative. The city of Pasadena says they're not really interested in necking down traffic in their jurisdiction. So the burden falls on us to find a fix. And I think as we looked at this carefully, we looked at what are the alternatives. One alternative was to say, well, let's narrow the median. But that had a host of problems and it took away the landscaping, and the landscaping is beautiful. So we decided, well, let's narrow the parkway width on the west side. And that was a little gut wrenching, but when we looked at it carefully, we realized that there are virtually no fronting homes on the west side, and the homes are above the level of the street and they're walled off. So we thought, well, you know, maybe that wouldn't be so bad to take 4 to 6 feet off the west side and keep a sidewalk, but just narrow the parkway so that we could have that continuous lane. One other comment. I think, you know, we talk about that. I mean, we are proud of the fact that we killed a freeway in the city, a north-south freeway. And now we want to manage the north-south movements. We've long had a problem with traffic traveling down Pasadena Avenue, jogging onto Fremont Avenue. We want to discourage traffic from doing that because in the city of Pasadena, it passes through single-family residential streets with beautiful craftsman homes. And in our jurisdiction, if you've traveled down St. John and Pasadena Avenue, a lot of that traffic is going to end up on Fremont. So we have to manage it better on Orange Grove so that it isn't encouraged to use St. John, Pasadena, and Fremont. And as Chair Abelson reminded all of us, there used to be 2 southbound lanes on Orange Grove. And because of the landscaping and some compromises that were made, they reduced it by 1 lane, but it hasn't worked. So I think the responsible thing would be to restore the 2nd lane so that it could have access to the Royal Sequel Parkway and to reduce the accidents that we know are occurring there, and to restore to avoid the situation where we have a non-standard lane drop which cannot be fixed by the current configuration.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fisher. And I just wanted to add a couple other things. And I respect Commissioner Dunlap's opinion and the fact that we're not going to have a unanimous consensus here, most likely. But you know, right now, the way it's constructed and designed, the one lane that's there is quite wide, and with the fact that a second lane is introduced. If the lane widths are appropriate and the striping is smart, the speeds can be managed in a much better way. And so the concern that, oh, all of a sudden with 2 lanes you're going to have speeding, I think is a fallacy. And the other comment I wanted to make is that there are very nice ornamental lamps, street lamps that were put up as part of that project, and those would be retained as the sidewalk would. They would simply be moved further west, closer to the sidewalk, and not so close to the street. So I think a lot of the aesthetic benefits of this Rogan funded project can be retained while at the same time unwinding the negative consequences of it, so that it's the concerns that a couple of the commenters made are easily addressed. So with that, is there anything anybody wants to add further on this, with the understanding that 3 of us are supportive and 1 is not? I'm hearing none. So Ted, wait.
Just a quick question for clarification. Ted, do we need to make a motion, or are we just making comments that you'll then take back to the council? What is the process that you're looking for?
So I'd say this could go a couple different ways. You know, I kind of envision this as maybe, you know, there's 3 possibilities here. The first, which, you know, has a high, you know, based on the council discussion, the first would be that the project gets, I think you do need to make a motion about your direction to staff first off. But one option would be that you choose to remove the project from the list. And you could have additional action for us, for city staff, to somehow reconsider the project or find other funding or do some other process. Because ultimately, we're not deciding whether the project should happen. We're deciding whether we should make a funding request under Measure N. So that's one option.
Would it help for us to take the proposal that you have here, and maybe, I know we mentioned to add the addendums to it with the descriptions that Chair Abelson and Vice Chair Fisher had so thoroughly drafted to help? Or would it help if we took the proposal and wordsmithed it and edited it and put it together in a way with more rationale, more you know, substantiation of thought and direction, to then go back to council? Or are you looking just for us to vote on motions? I guess I'm trying to figure out what can we do that would be most constructive.
Well, so I would say, like, so that would be what I would call the third option, is basically like, you want us to add, you want to keep the project largely the way it's described, but add additional information to maybe convince the council to move forward. Or option 2, I know I'm going backwards, would be sort of the middle of the road option, that you keep the project, you remove the specific language about the widening, and you more generalize that, you know, an Orange Grove project should be done in coordination with Pasadena. And we don't exactly know what that looks like, but, you know, it should be done with a study to address, you know, such and such a problem, the collisions, the speeding, that kind of thing. You know, I can't guarantee any level of success with any of those options. Certainly the council's direction was that they were not, you know, they didn't see it favorably. we could take it back, what I'll call option 3, with a lot of additional information. But there is that, outcome of the council saying, no, we heard you, we appreciate all the additional information, but we don't want to include this in the funding in that way. Now, I will say, go ahead.
We took it out, then do we then just make a placeholder for that funding? And say the funding will be used for, other pedestrian projects, or I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, because we have to put something in there for the funding to get this approved for the joint powers. So I'm kind of at a loss as how do we fill that in then to make sure we get the funding?
Yeah, I don't think that'll be an issue. I think council has plenty of ideas on how to reallocate funding, and I keep saying vice mayor, but Mayor Pro Tem Primoth had mentioned that there was some discussion about funding falling down trickling down into other priorities if the number 1 project didn't go, and this was the number 1 project. So I don't think that's you could certainly suggest that, but I think council's already made their deliberations on that. And we did have that reserve project in place for Meridian and Oak in case that were to happen. So I don't think you need to spend much time on that. I will say that going back to my earlier comment about the level of detail in the funding submittal to measure to the JPA, we didn't include things like the size of the new lanes and the size of the working area. We don't have any, even though that might have been estimated, we don't have any particular technical design criteria for this at this stage. Certainly, I think that we could express that we would make the utmost effort to preserve the sidewalk if you'd like us to include that language. But in looking realistically at the site, knowing that the current lane is very wide, there are some locations along that street where the parkway width is really just a couple feet, maybe a few feet, maybe 3 feet or so. And so I don't know that we want to make a commitment. I know the intention is to keep the pedestrian walkway, but I don't know that a final design would certainly keep it. So I just want to caution the commission as to making a commitment that this will be the case at the final project, that there will be a pedestrian walkway, and that's a guarantee at the other end of this project, because I don't know that we can say that. I just want to throw that out there.
But Ted, you do have other options. I mean, if there's a pinch point in the parkway and you can't get the 4 to 6 feet there, or you could get 2 feet there, there may be at the pinch point where you could take 2 feet off the median.
That is exactly right.
But at the pinch point.
Yeah, thank you for that, Commissioner Vice Chair Fisher. And that's why we worded it the way we did, sort of broadly, so that we didn't commit to one way or the other, that we could, that was something we definitely considered in writing the description.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important to indicate that there will be a sidewalk.
So we could add language to that effect, that's a priority of the project, is to maintain the pedestrian walkway.
Yeah, there was as far as I recall, and I'm Commissioner Dunlap has had his hand raised, so I see it. Just on the sidewalk issue, it's never anything we propose to eliminate it. We've walked that stretch multiple times. I don't see a basis for claiming that there won't be a sidewalk. There was a sidewalk before, as far as I recall. How wide or narrow it is, maybe up for discussion in certain points, perhaps. But I am worried because there are naysayers out there. There are a handful of them, but they are out there. And if staff says, oh, there's a risk that sidewalk will be removed, which I don't think is justified, then you're giving, it's fuel, right, for those to say, oh, this is not pedestrian friendly. And it's just, it's elevating the importance of the car over the pedestrian, which is 100% incorrect, false, right? There's always been a sidewalk there. There's no reason there won't be one. And if that means taking it from the median or something else, it can be done. So unless Ted, you're the stat, I mean, you're the expert, I'm not, but I just worry because council members are reactive sometimes, not always. And if they hear something, they're like, oh, we can't have that, right? So we need to be accurate and fair, right, in what we're reporting to them.
Yeah, I agree. And that's one of the difficulties of this job is making sure that you capture the public intent and make sure you move it through the process as intended. So I'll mention that, yeah, I think it is feasible, but I do think you may have to take some of the median in some of those locations. I could show you on a map particular where I'm looking at if you're interested. I don't know if you want to get into that level of detail.
Later, absolutely. Right now, no.
Okay, sure. But if you'd like, of course, there's concerns on both ends about removing the median, potential impacts to the pedestrian walkway. So if your direction and intent is to communicate that we can preserve the sidewalk, even if it means taking away some of the median, we can relay that to council most certainly without any sort of question as to whether that's possible. But then, there's like you said, there's a risk of council members or some of the community being very upset that we're going to take part of the median. I just don't want to be in a position where we're misleading anybody as far as like what the potential impacts of the project could be.
Well, but Ted, don't say we may have to take part of the median. Just say the sidewalk will be preserved and there will be a landscape median. And I wouldn't tell them any more than that because we don't know. We don't know if we have to take part of the median at this point. And I wouldn't raise that issue. That's a red flag.
I wouldn't raise it, but all I'm alluding to is if I get asked the direct question as to like, what do you think about do you think you may have to take the part of the median? The answer is I don't know. That is the answer.
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just want to be clear to Ted. You should be free to tell them whatever you want to tell them. We're just trying to make sure you understand the bigger picture.
Oh, of course, but this
all.
part of our conversation is just making sure we're communicating very clearly on what you would like me to convey, and I'm just giving you the feedback as what I'm expecting and how you'd prefer that I advise the council with your direction.
Just on that issue, if there were an area where some median might be taken away, I have to imagine that's a very small percentage of the total area that we're talking about. Is that a fair?
Yes, it's a very, very small percentage. And that's why I was concerned. It's really just like a point or two where, there's a narrowing that it's an issue, but largely, significantly that pedestrian walkway, there's space.
Okay. And I have to apologize to Commissioner Dunlap. I made him wait so long, he gave up. So before I get to Kim, I want to make sure Eric has a chance.
I did give up, but however, I mean, at minimum, if it's like the city's wish to proceed with this project, at minimum, there needs to be some sort of organized outreach to these residents and a community meeting with the data, showing the data now, showing the data before the crash, finding those old files, finding those old studies, telling the entire study. It seems like my fellow commissioners are ready to move forward with the project now. I'm certainly not, but I think to me, like those are the logical next steps is to have that community input.
If I can add to that, again, I run into this issue often is that, that process does have to happen in the future. But certainly if we had to undertake that process for these types of funding requests, it would make the process very difficult. In fact, I'm sure there's law on, environmental or impact law on how this works, but the city can't go so far down the path of project without that level of input and decision making that it's too late to sort of turn back, I would say. In this case, we really are just looking for a funding request. So that funding would undertake that public outreach, and certainly this project could come to a screeching halt if it doesn't move that direction. But that's why, you know, we all get in this sort of catch-22 situation of getting enough data together and enough public input just to make the funding request. Otherwise, you know, the city actually takes the opportunity to reach out for grant funding all the time with just ideas versus, you know, full public support behind grant or funding requests.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
That's great. Commissioner Hughes.
Just a quick point, Ted, perhaps, and I know that most of the city council members would remember, but we have a lot of residents that were not part of the city when this was a two lanes, both directions. And I don't know if it's worth putting in the report to the city council as a reminder, not necessarily that they won't remember, but there are a lot of people that might not be aware that we did have that configuration for many, many, many years. And just, again, it was changed out, what year it was changed out, and that we might make reference that there has been a lot of public comment about the dangers, the accidents, et cetera, and that we might say we want to get more concrete information via study or reports, et cetera, to substantiate that. But that would just be a suggestion I'd like to put out there.
I think that's a great point, because I don't think that's in at least the project description that we put together. I don't think we talked about the history or so that's a good point. I think context is significant. Okay, so unless there's anything more, I'm gonna attempt to make a motion. I think I know the direction it'll be headed. I move that we proceed with the funding request for the proposal on Orange Grove Avenue between Columbia Street and the 110 Freeway. Proceed with that funding request under measure M, and that staff add the additional information to support the request per our discussion. And of course, however we can help in putting that together, I'm sure we're happy to do so, or some of us. And that in an effort to convince the city council to move forward with this item. That's the motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay. Commissioner Hughes by a millisecond seconds. Why don't we take a vote? So if all those in favor would say aye and raise their hand per Liana's direction right now, that would be great.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, 3 ayes. All those against?
No.
Okay, Commissioner Dunlap is against, so that motion passes 3-1. So with that, I think unless there's any further discussion, I think we've addressed the measure M topics that were referred to us by city council and probably then some. With the other items, Ted, you have our direction, right? You don't need a particular motion on them.
You mean
Like the backup for Columbia Street or?
Oh, yes,
that kind of
yes,
thing.
I've got those notes. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, so we covered whatever you think we should have covered on the measure M front?
Yes, we will draft a new staff report, given all the discussion here today and your direction and motion, and bring that before the council, probably late April or early May.
Okay, and I this is just an ask of on my own. So I was looking at your staff report for our meeting today on this topic, and it's a little bit general in terms of the result of your conversation with the city of Pasadena on this topic. But it seems like during our conversation tonight, you clarified that their reaction to our suggestion that they merge the lanes north of Columbia, that their reaction to that was negative, not supportive. Is that fair? I mean, in other words, it's important, I think, for you to communicate to city council specifically the result of your conversation with city Pasadena on this topic. And I don't what in the staff report, it's a little generalized here. It doesn't really say.
Yeah, I mean, so the response wasn't a flat out no. It was, we've looked at it and we don't see a way it could work, but we're open to a project that makes improvements for both cities.
Okay, well, whatever it was, whatever
Yeah.
that would be great so that they know.
Yes,
helpful.
yeah.
Because the essence of that is they're not interested, but we'll be happy to talk about other things. That's my
Yes.
takeaway. Okay. Sorry, let me get back to the agenda. Give me 1 second, I apologize. Okay, all right. Oh, selection of officers, I think is up next. Item 5. All right. And I was derelict, by the way. I just want to confirm there wasn't any public comment with regard to the Measure M projects, was there, Liana?
No, there was none.
Okay, I apologize. Okay, thank you. Next up, item 5, selection of officers. Ted, anything you want to say before we get into it?
I guess the only thing I'll say is that I might have touched on it last time. I don't recall, but the commissioner evaluation found that there's a directive to preserve all of the public works commissions and just find alternative methods to support staff and, you know, accommodating all of the work that's generated from the commissions. So with that said, there's no planned reduction or change to this commission. And we had waited until that evaluation was complete to do the selection of officers, which has to be completed by the end of March. And so that is why this item is on the agenda tonight. It's by municipal code to complete this process. And seeing as there's no, expected changes, then we can move forward with selection of officers for the year.
Okay, great. I probably not, but I just want to, does anybody have any questions for Ted on this topic? Seeing none. Okay. Oh, Commissioner Dunlap.
As far as a recruitment of a new commissioner, do you have a timeline on when that person
Yeah,
will be
that's a good
appointed?
question. I think it's on tomorrow's agenda. I'm sort of mixing up March 16th and April 6th, but I think it's either on tomorrow's agenda or the early April agenda. I
Okay.
can take a
And
look actually.
I saw like an email blast advertising the commission saying like commissioners needed. And then I clicked on it and I think it has the old commission name on there. I think it says Freeway and Transportation. At least what was attached. So just suggest toreviewing that and making sure that the commissions match what they.
Sure,
today.
I'll take a look at that. Thanks for letting us know.
So just to follow up to Ted's response, I think tomorrow night, the council, the item on the council agenda is reappointment of existing commissioners on a number of different commissions, and for ours that would be Vice Chair Fisher and Commissioner Hughes are being proposed for reappointment. But I don't see any new ones on that list. So it must be the next meeting. Ted.
Okay, that makes sense. No, and that is what I saw. So I misunderstood. Then I don't know the date of the appointment, and that actually would align with Commissioner Dunlap saying, so that they're reappointing existing commissioners and they're actually looking for new commissioners because of that blast that Commissioner Dunlap mentioned. So actually, I don't have a date for new appointments.
So you're not aware of somebody being selected, tentatively to fill the open slot, as far as you know?
No, my understanding was what you had just mentioned, which is I didn't look closely enough to see it was just reappointments.
Okay, great. Any other questions for Ted? No. All right. Well, normally we would discuss ad nauseum, but I'm going to make a motion. I move that Vice Chair Fisher be chair of this commission beginning next month, and that Commissioner Dunlap ascend, if that's the right word, to the position of vice chair for the coming, I'll just say fiscal year season. Does anybody want to discuss that?
I would second that as long as that both are agreeable.
Commissioner Dunlap, are you on board?
I'm on board. It's been a ride being a part of this commission the past year and 3 months. I've learned more about stop signs and measuring them than I ever cared to know. But yeah, I look forward to it and kind of learning more and growing into this. So thank you for your nomination. I'm happy to serve in this role.
Fantastic. And Vice Chair Fisher, are you ready to assume the throne?
I'm on board and look forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, great. So thank you both for accepting. So I think we have a motion and Commissioner Hughes seconded, yes?
Yes.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that looks like 4 yeses and
Aye.
unanimity. So congratulations to you both and best of luck. That was probably our quickest agenda item in history. So that's fantastic. And thank you both for agreeing to serve. Next up, we have,
Commissioner Hughes has her hand raised.
oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to
Staring at
say,
my
I'm
phone,
happy
looking at the
to continue to be our pseudo secretary. I'm happy to continue that role as we talk
I'm
about.
sorry.
It's
I
okay.
apologize. Yes, that would be fantastic. Is that, I'm so busy trying to move forward, I neglected that. Is that, Leanna, is that an official position? Is that something we need to formally move on, or? I'm
It's,
not
it's
quite
up
sure.
to the commission. We can
Okay.
vote on it if you like, just for the record.
Well, let's do it. All
I
right.
would
So
1000% support that. I'm not.
I'll take that as a motion by Commissioner Dunlap. I'm going to second as one of my outgoing prerogatives. So why don't we do that? So motion to approve, motion to reappoint Commissioner Hughes as secretary of our fine organization. All those in favor, please raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Okay, so passes unanimously. Thank you, Commissioner Hughes, for all that you do and reminding me of the need to take care of that. So thank you so much. And a humongous thank you to Liana for preparing the draft minutes every month. I can only imagine what kind of a process it is. And painful, I'm sure, is one of the words. But anyway, thank you both. Moving forward, item 6. So item 6 and 7, commission-led discussion. First up is the COVID-19 Slow Streets Ad Hoc Committee, which I believe is a committee of 1. But basically, it's a placeholder to see if there are any updates either from staff or the committee this month. So I'll open the floor.
Yeah, as a solo member of the committee, I think I was curious where like the slow streets implementations were at the Grand and the Oak Street, as well as the study that was going to be done by iTerrace.
Yes, so good news on that front. We had asked council for a new appropriation to support that program at our mid-year budget process last month, and they approved that. We also applied for a $50,000 grant from the SGV COG to support that program, and that is looking favorable for us. So we do have funding. So our next step is actually meeting with the previous project team on this week, Thursday, to finalize a scope of work. And our hope would be to come back to the commission to gain a recommendation to take that scope of work and contract agreement to council for authorization so we could start in about a month or so. So the idea would be that this new process would pick up where the old one left off, where iTerrace had completed the study, but the design had not yet taken that study into account. So it would start at that place for the mission component. For the residential component, the design is done and it could start at public outreach / implementation. The key for this, the remainder work will be how the public outreach is conducted, particularly for the mission section, because there's a couple different ways we could go about doing it. Doing it outright, and then the design is informed by that outreach, or actually a sort of a more iterative approach where the design is implemented, and then the different areas of the implementation are sort of included in that process. So it's a little more, a little more of a more concentrated feedback loop with the people who are actually getting the parklets near their locations. So that's what we're hoping to get clarified with our project team to bring back to discuss with you and then move forward.
Great. And I had one question, and former Commissioner Liu and I have been brainstorming this, and I'm not sure if I got lost in scope of work anywhere, but ensuring that there's some sort of comms piece, like communications piece, that goes along with these slow streets implementations, like taking some really nice photos, putting them in social media, as well as like news outlets, local news outlets, could be a good opportunity just to build some support around it, and it's not as much as a shock of people. And then also advertise, the 66 Golden Streets and some of those more open street type events.
That's a great point. So our, current city manager administration is very big on that engagement process and social media and that type of outreach. So one of our next step is actually to work with them to see what the timing of this should be. How does it work with their, social media campaign, other events in the city? And that was actually something we considered, was that the implementation may fall in between, somewhere in between Mission to Mission and Arroyo Fest. And, that would be, we want to make sure it's all sort of a cohesive open streets, thing that's happening in the city. So that's a really good point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Commissioner or Vice Chair Dunlap. Commissioner Hughes.
Ted, just a quick question on that. And I think Vice Chair Dunlap was coming to make sure that we also coordinate with the chamber, because the chamber have got their art festival, and I know they're going to ramp up and start having a lot more of the real, community events that we've put on hold the last 2 years, to make sure that if we can get timing wise, to make sure, like, if we get the parklets and the equipment and the deliveries and all of that, so that we kind of gear it so that we get the exposure and we can get as much done for these major events that bring in a lot of visitors, that will help the community and help the businesses when these are all in place.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And so we expect that Active SUV will probably be likely to help us again with that public outreach as part of the project team. And they've got a good relationship with the chamber in that respect. So that's what we're hoping to, emphasize, as we were talking about. We probably won't, I know that we won't have anything implemented before the Mission to Mission event, because it's in 6 weeks. But certainly for the other events in the fall, we want to try to target that.
Yeah, because we've even got the, thinking about, there's supposed to be bringing back the 4th of July parade and Festival of Balloons. So that would be the first time in 2 years down Mission. So that's another event that really draws. And again, that's, closer, obviously July, but it's a great opportunity when we start thinking about exposure for the city, drawing business, getting more people to come and shop and spend money.
Yeah, our project team has really switched on to that, that whole concept. So we're looking forward to that type of, integration. Thank you.
Anything else on the slow streets front that anybody would like to cover? Okay, seeing none. When we move on to item 7, the SR 710 mobility improvement projects. Well, the committee is comprised of John and I. I don't have any specific update. John is shaking his head, so we'll look to you, Ted, to see if there's anything other than that you haven't already covered that you want to share?
I pretty much covered it earlier in the month. There was a board meeting that emphasized the repurposing, I'll say, of the Measure R funds, which came out of the 710 mobility improvement projects. And so, like I said, we're working to take advantage of that reimagining of how Measure R funds can be utilized in our Fremont Huntington project. And then in that same respect, Pasadena's released a request for proposals or quotations or qualifications, I think, to imagine what their MIP projects are going to look like. And so we'll continue our discussion with them as they move through that, because that will certainly affect our city and how they select their types of 710 MIP projects.
So do we have a sort of a standing meeting with them every month or so to talk about these types of issues in our joint issues on the border and that kind of thing?
Yes, we do. I have to make sure that the frequency is often enough, because we added one today for the Measure M stuff. But yeah, we have a standing meeting. I just got to check on the frequency and make sure it's adequate.
Yeah, I think that would be so helpful given how many issues in common we have, and keeping that conversation. And it seems like you're developing a good working relationship with them. So it'd be great to keep that dynamic going, and take advantage of it for both cities' benefit. So that's great. Okay, any questions, public comments at all with regard to the SR 710 mobility projects?
No public comment.
Okay, all right. Thanks, everyone. All right, next up, well, I know this will be quick. Next up is City Council Liaison Communications. I think Councilmember Primmett had to leave. So we can quickly move on to Commissioner Communications. Oh, wait, I see a raised hand. Liana?
That's me. That's by accident. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, no worries. Okay, so next up, Commissioner Communications, Commissioner Dunlap.
All right, two things. I think they'll be quick. The first one, thanks for the update as far as keeping the Public Works Commissions goes. I think there was a discussion during that time about ways to enhance and streamline the commission so they're less of a burden on public works staff. Looking now, we're 3 hours and 10 minutes into the meeting. And so, Ted, this is your evening, it's time taking away from your life. So if Commissioner Fisher is agreeable, perhaps on a future agenda, maybe when we discuss the work plan, we can talk about opportunities to streamline these meetings, or just to make them a little bit more manageable for you. As someone who works in your field, Director Gerber, I am so impressed and admire kind of what you do here, and just your dedication into attending council meetings until 1:40 in the morning to discuss Measure M projects. I think that's kind of crazy. And if I had $1 billion, if I could give you a raise, I'd give you a raise, because it's a lot of work, and we appreciate your hard work here. And if we could just kind of talk candidly about how we can make that a little less burdensome, that'd be great. So that's my first thing. Second, about 3 years ago, the city hired a consultant to do a systemic safety analysis report. And it was around $200,000. Portions of that report aren't discoverable. It's a grant from Caltrans, and then you can do a safety analysis. And one of the requirements is that it results in some sort of infrastructure recommendation. And I'm just curious, kind of it being like 3 years later after that report, what were the findings of that report? And we don't have to, maybe at a future meeting or something like that, or even offline, it'd be good to kind of hear what came out of that. I think a lot of the work was around picking up asset data around the city, like where you have signs and markings and that sort of thing. But as to like any recommendations that come from it, I'd be curious to know. to see how those might be programmed as part of future projects.
Sure. I hadn't heard about that. I wonder, was it like a local roadway safety type of?
Well, it's a Caltrans program. It's the Systemic Safety Analysis Report Program.
Oh, yes, the
And-
SSRP. Yeah.
And it was around $200,000. And just one of the requirements is that it result in some sort of engineering recommendations. What you actually do with that money is pretty flexible. There's a lot of leeway given to local agencies. Like some people did asset collections, some did predictive analysis, some did all kinds of things, but it did have to result in some sort of recommendation. So I was just kind of curious
Yeah,
what
I
those
think
were.
it's we can look at that for you. I think we actually utilized the fact that study was conducted as a cornerstone for funding eligibility. So we could pull that out and see what it says. That'd be interesting to look at.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Dunlap. Sorry, Vice Chair Dunlap. Soon to be Chair Fisher.
Thank you. I thought Commissioner Dunlap had an excellent idea about trying to streamline the meetings. I know we've handled a lot of weighty issues, so that's been difficult. But I would like for Commissioner Dunlap and I to meet with you, Ted, and any staff you want to invite to discuss the format for the upcoming meetings and ways that we can make it more efficient and have the meetings, be limited to maybe 2.5 hours rather than the 3.5, 4 hours that they're taking. So yeah, let's set up a meeting and discuss that. And I would like to thank Chair Abelson for his ability to handle some of these difficult, weighty projects and to bring consensus or near consensus among the commission on these items. He was always striving to figure out, well, where's the point where we can all agree? And I think he's done an excellent job of that. So just wanted to congratulate him for a fine year on being the chair of this commission.
Thank you very much. I appreciate those kind words, and it takes the support of all of you to get these things done. So it's a team effort, but thank you. Thank you, John. Commissioner/Secretary Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also wanted to also say thank you for your service and being our fearless leader this last year. It was an interesting year with the pandemic and weighty issues and changes in personnel, and how fortunate we are to have Director Gerber. You are truly dedicated and so well organized and thoughtful. It is truly a delight and a privilege to work with you and collaborate, and as well as Liana, who's kept us all sort of on the straight and narrow and organized and on time and agendized. And to thank you also for the city signage on the hill. It's looking a lot better. I can actually see there's still some work I think we need to do, but it really looks great. I also had a question, bringing up a subject that hasn't come up in a while. Is there was community meetings probably at the very early beginning, January-ish 2020, that Caltrans hosted. And I believe Commissioner Fisher was there as well, where they were talking about perhaps adopting changes to the Arroyo Parkway. And they were looking at various reconfigurations. There was comments about perhaps adding a lane, more safety, pull-offs, perhaps even designating certain lanes at certain hours of the day. Then obviously the pandemic happened, and I don't believe I've seen or heard anything since then. And I wanted to kind of bring it forth because as we're looking, and we mentioned earlier, the Arroyo Parkway entrance off of Orange Grove and such, if we've heard anything about that, or if we've heard any information, if anyone has, about those potential projects, because there was also, depending upon what they do, could impact what those off ramps or on ramps. So I just want to kind of throw that out there, because it was quite a while ago, pre-pandemic, but I haven't heard or seen anything since.
Yes, haven't heard about those, but certainly we can try to find out. We'll have, we have a plan. We are planning to make, have a discussion with Caltrans about some other items I had mentioned. So we can ask what's going on with that, give you an update on that process.
I can look somewhere. I think I have their proposal that they handed out at that community meeting. Commissioner Fisher, how many? There wasn't that many people. It was maybe 50 people there.
Something like that. I think it was in October 2019.
Oh, maybe.
And I submitted comments on to give them some additional ideas. I never even got a confirmation letter that they received it, and I sent it electronically as well as in hard copy. I haven't heard anything about that.
Yeah, it was pre-pandemic. If you might be correct, it was October, but there was various concepts that they were sharing with the public to get feedback. And then I've heard nothing. So if you are talking to Caltrans, it would be interesting if that just all died, or if there was still, ideas of moving forth on any of those concepts, because we just want to keep it in mind, because as we look at our loop ramp, and as we look at, what we might be doing in Orange Grove or other, how it might impact, that's all. But again, I want to thank you very much for all of the work and time you put in. It's much appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Chair, current chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. All right, so I guess that leaves me just a couple of quick thoughts. And this came up several meetings ago, or a few meetings ago. And I'm confident that John and Eric are much more well-versed and knowledgeable about this topic, but the California legislature passed, I think it's AB 43, which went into effect beginning of this year, which allowed cities in certain circumstances to lower speed limits without being tied to some old standards and ways of setting speed limits on streets. And I think in certain circumstances, cities could reduce the speed limit on certain streets by 5 miles an hour based on various criteria and circumstances. This is not news, but the city of LA recently passed an ordinance, I think, reducing speed limits on something upwards of 200 streets. So it's just an interesting development, and it's something maybe that we just keep in mind, because we've been caught in a dilemma with streets like Arroyo Drive between the city of Pasadena border southerly to the 110 freeway, let's say, in the infamous city of South Pasadena sign at the freeway. The speed limit is 35 miles an hour on Arroyo Drive, which is incredulous to me. It seems way too fast. And interestingly, it's only 30 miles an hour on Pasadena Avenue, which is a 4-lane arterial north of our border. So it seems like we have some streets where, because of perhaps past speed surveys or whatnot, we have posted speed limits that may be higher than appropriate. And I know we recently got an extension on the need to do speed surveys in town, I believe. But it's just something we should be keeping in mind going forward, that there may be some streets with some special challenges where something like what City of LA did might be appropriate for us. So just something to keep in mind. And then the other thing is, and I know I could just pass it straight to the city manager, but Ted, I was wondering if it's something you could bring up. So I think daily I get, and maybe all of us do, these City Hall scoop announcements. And I think Vice Chair Dunlap mentioned one that came out today about the need for more commissioners or people to express interest in being commissioners. It would be so fantastic if there was some way for the city to include in one of those announcements a bulletin about upcoming commission meetings. Because I think it'd be great for people to know in advance, oh, MTIC has a meeting next week. Maybe I'll go to the website and see what the agenda is. The Planning Commission has a meeting coming up, or it doesn't have to be for every commission, but it seems like ones that might deal with relatively high profile issues. It'd be great if there was a way for people to know that these meetings are upcoming, because I don't think a lot of people do. So that's just a suggestion that Ted, maybe you can pass along to the city manager, whoever the appropriate person might be.
Larry, one thing to share is that WISPA has a weekly newsletter to all of their members, anyone who wants to sign up to get it electronically. And they list all the commission meetings every week as you were moving through the calendar. So there is that tool that is alerting people to the commission. But again, having more information out in the marketplace to alert our residents about meetings and commission meetings, all the better.
Yeah, that's great to know. And I think whatever we can do to let the community know what's going on and what issues we're tackling is terrific. It's not to say that there's something lacking right now, but I think just more publication about what's going on would be great, because like Vice Chair Dunlap has mentioned, community involvement is important and awareness is involvement, and no one should be caught unawares. At least we're never going to get everybody, but and I know, with this Measure M discussion, I think I'll call it that. We've had, innumerable public hearings and meetings on it. Our commission, the prior commission, the city council, there've been special meetings on it in the past. So it would be great just to give people every opportunity to participate if they so choose and want to subject themselves to that. So that's it for my comments. I think we've covered all the commissioners. So last up, before we adjourn, staff liaison communications, if there's anything, Ted or Liana, you want to add?
I do have something to share. April the 16th, Saturday, April the 16th, it'll be our annual dumpster day. So you are more than welcome to participate at the drive-through. That's going to be on Arroyo Drive, just south of Mission. It starts at 8:30 until 2. And then for those that are seniors that are over the age of 62, you can contact the Community Services Department at 626-403-7360. And you can contact them the week prior to the event. So that's going to be, I believe it's the 11th through the 15th. And the last day to register, if you are a senior, would be on the 15th at 12 o'clock noon.
Liana, do you know if we're going to have a hazardous waste this year?
You know what? No, I don't think we are, because of the fact that the school district has been sold, or the building is no longer, we don't have a location at this point. You can also go onto Clean LA's website to take a look of those that are close by. And I want to say El Monte might be next, like on March, this coming up Saturday, maybe, that you're welcome to attend, but I don't know how close El Monte is to us, but yeah.
Yeah, I had some people ask, so I said, well, together I'll ask.
Okay.
I'll add that the next one in Alhambra at the Public Works headquarters, I think is scheduled for August-ish. I had to check with that coordinator at Public Works. However, yeah, they are, I think, on the Clean LA website or on the County Public Works website.
Thank you.
You just might have to drive.
Terrific. Thank you all very much. Anything else, Ted or Liana?
Just one quick item, and just to follow up on the city scoop issue and the Freeway Commission error, we'll forward those comments on to get that corrected, and also maybe include the upcoming commission meetings. So yeah, we covered everything. I don't really have anything else to add. I'll just say briefly that we are attempting to make some reorganizations and some staff additions and some budget changes to accommodate additional contract assistance So that is a lot of work in itself to get done, but once we get it done, we'll have some more support. So that might be helpful in terms of our resources to facilitate some of these meetings and some of these projects. So I just want to throw that out there. But other than that, no other updates. I think we covered most everything else.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Ted. Really appreciate it, and appreciate everybody for sticking it out. I really try to keep these meetings short, but it never seems to work out that way. So good luck to our new leaders on that. Thank you all very much. I think we've covered everything. So I will call this meeting adjourned. Have a wonderful evening.
See everybody next month in person.
That's right.
Yes.
Thank
That's
you
right.
all.
Thank you.